Good evening. This is the August 24th, 2017 meeting of the Monroe Planning and Zoning Commission, meeting in Town Hall Chambers. It is now 7:08. Can you please rise and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And will the commission please introduce themselves, starting on my right?
Bruno Maini, alternate. Jonathan Formicella, alternate.
Kathy Lindstrom, alternate.
Leanne Ambrosi, Commissioner.
David Townsend, Vice Chairman.
William Porter, Chairman.
Paul Lisi, Commissioner. Michael Riley, Secretary.
Will Augusta, Planner.
Scott Schatz, I am Land Use Group Director and Town Engineer.
Rebecca Wood, Recording Secretary.
Thank you. General public participation. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission on a matter that's not related to any of the public hearings? Seeing none, move on to general appointments. We have none. All right, move on to public hearings. We have 3 public hearings tonight. I will read the instructions to the audience for conduct of the hearing. There are 2 sets of microphones for both public address and recording of the proceedings. Due to the need for recording, it is important to stand at the microphone at all times and speak into it loudly and clearly in order that everyone in the room can hear and to capture what is being said. Individuals speaking from the seats will not be heard and will not be recognized to speak. Order of the hearing of an application. Points of order and responses will be entertained. Exhibits will be read for the record. Applicant and/or representatives will present the application and will answer commission questions. The floor will be open to those in favor. The floor will be open to those opposed. The floor will be open to general comments or questions. The floor will be open to the applicant, who may take the opportunity for closing remarks or rebuttal, after which discussion will close. The applicant or his representatives are the final speakers. No comment shall be accepted from anyone unless recognized by the chair. All questions and comments shall be addressed to the chair, who will determine if an answer shall be provided and by whom. There shall be absolutely no discussion between speakers and audience. The commission has no intention to limit the right of any person to speak, but asks that speakers try not to be repetitive. Please try to present new information. If something has been said before, the commission would invite you to indicate your agreement with previous speakers. At no time shall there be displays of emotion, such as applause, cheering, shouting, or similar noise. This is critical as this hearing is being recorded. If this happens, you will be cautioned. A vote or demonstration by a show of hands, standing by the audience, or similar action will not be recognized. All parties are requested not to talk between themselves while the hearing is in progress. If you feel the need to talk, please step out into the lobby. All speakers, when recognized, must advance to the microphone to speak. Please state your name and address for the record. The chairman reserves the right to cut off discussion if it is not relevant to the application or is presented in an inappropriate manner. This is a legal proceeding, much the same as what would occur in a courtroom setting. We request that all parties observe the proper decorum that would be observed in that setting. Please turn off all cell phones or similar devices. If you have a need to use these devices, please leave the room and use them outside. First up is item number 5 on the agenda, SUB 2017-01, file number 1261C, 36 Timothy Hill Road, Section 6, Pepper Street Business Park, I-2 District, application for re-subdivision from New England Materials LLC / John Kimball to create 4 industrial building lots with access via a new dedicated public road connection. This is reconvened from July 20th, 2017. And Will, what do we have for
Exhibits.
Exhibits.
The additional exhibits we have since the last session were Exhibit 30, response to comments by the applicant. Exhibit 31, LOD within wetland crossing by the applicant. Exhibit 32, a corridor plan by the applicant. Exhibit 33, plan set revisions through August 15th by the applicant. Exhibit 34, updated town engineer comments through August 21st. Exhibit 35, assessment of wetland watercourse and vernal pool conditions by the applicant. Exhibit 36, memorandum from M. Blackburn and Kevin Soley. Exhibit 37, potential development plan from the applicant. And Exhibit 38, conserving pool breeding activities in residential commercial development, Metropolitan Conservation Alliance. Exhibit 39, vernal pool best management practices, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Exhibit 40, vernal pool directional buffer guidance. Exhibit 41, updated town engineer comments, August 24th, 2017. That is all.
Okay. And for the applicant,
Good evening, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Kevin Soley. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut with Soley Engineering. Office is located here in Monroe at 501 Main Street. We're here this evening for the continuation of a public hearing for a proposed 4-lot re-subdivision of 36 Timothy Hill Road. We are not bringing any revised information to the commission this evening in terms of dropping off plans. We understand how the commission feels about that. I will say that I believe there was probably some miscommunication with some staff comments that we did not receive until very recently this week. So there will be some revised information that we will be presenting this evening, and we will be dropping off hard copies of those after this meeting, so as well in advance of your next meeting. I do have, for the record, that's fine. An extension letter for the applicant to grant an extension of the public hearing to remain open until the Inland Wetlands Commission has a chance to deliberate and offer their referral comments. The Inland Wetlands Commission hearing did close their public hearing last evening, and I believe they'll be deliberating and providing their report at their next hearing. So I will issue that for the record.
thank you.
Okay, I did listen while Will was reading the exhibits. I'm not sure if it made it into the commission's packet, but we did submit a copy of a review memo by Bill Kenny and William Kenny Associates, who's the sole scientist for this application, and the biologist. He did review our vernal pool memo, which was also submitted to the commission, and provided some additional referral comments and expert testimony at the wetlands hearing last evening. I'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but if you don't have it in your packet, I will make sure that that is included in our next submission of revised information.
Well, I'm not seeing that. We didn't get that, did we?
We have.
I have it. I don't know.
It's
I never
marked August 22nd.
Yeah, I remember seeing it myself.
Yeah, we dropped it off, and I think we'd even emailed a copy as well, but I think there was some,
Should be the next page. Is that letter dated August 18th?
it is,
Looks
that's
just
correct.
like this, Bill.
For some reason, it did not make it into my packet. And, you know, I had duplicates on another document, and I was wondering if there was something that I was missing.
Yeah, it's exhibit 35.
Okay.
Well, great, I'm glad to hear that it's in your information, and we'll run through it a little bit more. So just to kind of reorient everybody, this area is the town of Monroe. The Pepper Street Business Park is along the northern edge of, just south of the town line with Newtown. Route 25 runs north-south in this location here along the western side of town. Just a little bit more detail. Pepper Street provides a loop connecting to Route 25 in these two locations here. And this Pepper Street Business Park is actually off the northerly intersection with Pepper Street, Route 25. So this just shows the business park has been developed over several phases since 2002. This represents a current configuration. We're here this evening to talk about the re-subdivision of Section 6, which is 36 Timothy Hill Road. This project has been subject to several approvals for re-subdivision from both the Inland Wetlands Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission. The site is impacted, or the site does have some wetlands corridor in this location here along the western edge of the property, and some isolated wetland pockets within the overall property at 36 Timothy Hill. This screen reflects the previously approved re-subdivision of this property. which was approved for a 5-lot subdivision. This right-of-way line here shows the continuation or extension of Independence Drive, which was previously approved, connecting to Timothy Hill Road. And as part of those previous approvals, Timothy Hill Road was going to be renamed Independence Drive, which would provide connection from from Pepper Street through the business park, from Enterprise Drive, all the way to Fan Hill Road to the east in this location here. So what we're proposing is a modification to what was previously approved as part of that 5-lot subdivision, which is depicted in this configuration here. It is a 4-lot re-subdivision. The road has been shifted down to accommodate some redesign of parcels to address actual tenant interest for the property. The proposed roadway does include 2 wetland crossings in this location here, which is consistent with the previously approved re-subdivision for this same property. These have actually been located in slightly narrower locations from the previous approvals, and they are proposed to have 2 precast concrete arch bridge structures, which will provide a full span over those wetlands and will not have any direct wetland impact as part of this application. I'm going to be running through, as I stated, we did provide some revised information in advance of this hearing. I'm going to be running through those changes in addition to some other changes that we're going to be submitting to the commission in response to some of the latest staff comments. I'm not going to touch on all of them this evening because we obviously recognize the hearing will be left open, but I do want to make sure we hit some of those critical points. So this again just depicts the proposed roadway layout. Again, we have 2 wetland crossings in this location here, and an extension of Independence Drive all the way to the existing Timothy Hill, which will be renamed Independence Drive. Our proposed grading and drainage plan has been designed in accordance with the 2004 Water Quality Manual, as provided by DEEP. We do have a series of water quality basins which have been designed to provide treatment for the water quality volume associated with the drainage from the roadway, and which will be discharged into all the stormwater goes to the Great Pine Swamp, and all of our design has been prepared in accordance with all of the previous approvals issued for this property. Our soil erosion sediment control plan has been designed in accordance with the 2002 Soil Erosion Sediment Control Manual as provided by DEEP. And there are a number of measures, as we've discussed. This project has been previously approved and has started construction. Our proposed SEC measures are consistent with what was previously approved, and if the commission has done a site walk, you can see that a lot of those measures have been installed as part of that other approval, which is currently under construction. All of our utilities are proposed to be underground, which is consistent with past approvals, not only for this property, but the balance of the business park. This will actually create a loop for electric that connects all the way to Timothy Hill and Fan Hill Road. Water service is extended through, gas service is extended through. We've been in discussions with Eversource, and as the commission may be aware, the town of Monroe does have a grant to provide roadway improvements on Timothy Hill. That is a public road. It isn't active. There are no active businesses on that road, but the town does have, I believe, $500,000 set aside to do improvements there. I believe there were some drainage improvements that were started but never finished, and as part of that as well, in our discussions with Eversource, as part of the town's project, they would provide overhead service through Timothy Hill, which would connect into our underground service being installed as part of this application. Our landscape plan has been designed consistent with previous approvals for the property, where our primary focus is around the proposed bridge crossings and the water quality basins. In these locations here, we are requesting a waiver for street trees, which was previously approved by this commission for the past approvals on the property. And again, our rationale behind that is, as individual lots are developed, they will be required to come in with a landscape plan and comply with the landscape requirements through this normal SEP process. And then this just depicts an aerial with our proposed roadway rendered. Now, I wanted to touch on some of the revisions that we had talked about, and specifically some of the responses to additional comments. One of the things we talked about at length at the last hearing was the geometric configuration for lot 29. Now, this lot is lot 29. And there was some discussion on whether or not this constituted a rear lot, which are obviously prohibited from your regulations. We do not believe this meets the definition of a rear lot because there's developable area in the front portion of the lot. The minimum square is required. There is not a minimum lot width required in this zone, and we felt that what we provided met or did not meet the definition of a rear lot. There was a difference of opinion there. So one of the things that the commission will receive is a revised subdivision plan, which actually revises that lot line to ensure that there's a minimum of 150 feet depth throughout the entire length of this project. So there's absolutely no question on whether or not this could be considered a rear lot. So we will be submitting a revised re-subdivision plan which reflects that change so that there's a minimum of 150 feet all the way back through this lot. This plan was submitted and reviewed with the Inland Wetlands Commission, so it's everything that they need in their record to act on the application. And this change in lot line does not have any change from a substantive standpoint to the design of the roadway or any of the regulated activity associated with that approval. And we feel that we've adequately addressed that comment and eliminated any shadow of doubt regarding the geometry of that part of that proposed lot. We have also revised the potential development plan to reflect that change in property line here. We've also provided some minor changes to the grading behind lot 30 to slightly increase the buffer from the regulated wetlands to the north, which were some of the discussions that we had with the Wetlands Commission. And again, the potential development plan is simply an opportunity to present to the commission how these lots could be developed. As we discussed at the last hearing, there is specific interest for some of these lots, and specifically lot 30, and we wanted to be transparent in our application to show, assuming the subdivision is approved, hopefully we'll be bringing a new application in for these individual lots right behind it. So we are excited about that. There was a lot of discussion at the last hearing, or I know there's been some discussion through the planner's comments regarding vernal pools on the property. And one of the things that we've done, which I think is kind of above and beyond what's typically looked at from a subdivision application standpoint, is the Wetlands Commission had concern about our potential development plan and what that may mean in terms of potential impacts to vernal pools. So we did a comprehensive assessment and analysis of the vernal pools on the property and reviewed several different guidance documents provided by the Army Corps of Engineers and some other renowned experts regarding the treatment of vernal pools. And what we've done is we've provided a comprehensive memorandum which summarizes all of the best management practices that we're incorporating as part of our proposed development on the potential development plan. And that has shaped how those potential lot developments will be realized as part of any individual application. So we've gone through this at length with the Wetlands Commission, and some of the components that are a primary focus for vernal pool protections are there's really two main areas that need to be protected. Actually three, excuse me. There's the limits of the vernal pool itself. There's the vernal pool envelope, which represents a 100-foot buffer from the limit of the vernal pool. And then there's a critical terrestrial habitat. For the Army Corps, they define that as a 750-foot radius from the edge of the, actually it's 750-foot radius from the vernal pool itself, but it's comprised of the distance between the 100-foot of the vernal pool envelope and the 750 feet of the terrestrial habitat. And that reflects where vernal pool obligate species may migrate as part of their migratory patterns. So essentially, what that means is they breed in the pool itself. The critical terrestrial habitat, that 100-foot buffer, is imperative to make sure that it doesn't actually impact the ability to breed in the pools. And then the terrestrial habitat is where they migrate and live and play and frolic as vernal pool obligate species. Frogs, yes, frogs, salamanders, etc.
Frolic in the vernal pool.
They do as well.
No, I mean, frolic. They don't frolic in the upland terrestrial habitat, they frolic in the vernal pool.
They sure.
They may
Okay.
play in the upland.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes. All right, it's potato, potato. Anyways, so one of the things that we wanted to look at is because there was such concern about this from a potential development plan, we went through this analysis because we wanted to make sure that we were providing not only the Wetlands Commission, but also this commission some additional analysis of what we're looking at from potential impact. And when you look at, so we did a comparison of what was previously approved with the previous potential development plan, because that is established, that is approved, and that exists. We can't ignore that. And we compared that to what's proposed as part of our current potential development plan. We also provided additional analysis regarding corridors. Now, there's a number of guidance documents that are provided by the Army Corps of Engineers that talk about these vernal pool obligate species. When you draw a circular radius from a vernal pool for the 750 feet, that isn't necessarily indicative of how these creatures may actually migrate. And they actually say that depending on the species, salamanders or frogs, they may actually travel up to a mile from their initial vernal pool. So what we did is we actually looked at not only the 750 feet, but also what additional corridors exist where these obligate species could travel and migrate. And what we determined was, in addition to the 111 acres around the vernal pools on our property and off our property, there's an additional 262 acres that meet the definition of this critical terrestrial habitat of forested, either upland or wetland, where these obligate species may migrate to. So to the south, there are some lands that are actually somewhat under control where there isn't a high likelihood that they may be developed. This parcel here is owned by the town of Monroe, and this parcel to the south of that is owned by Aquarian Water Company and its public water supply watershed land. To the north, as you continue in this area here, and what we've done is we've highlighted for the Wetlands Commission and for your information, these parcels, which are highlighted in purple, reflect properties that are either publicly owned or water company owned. And then to the north, and as this wraps around, you see that same buffer here, or that same demarcation here, which is also either owned by Aquarian, or I believe there's some parcel owned by the town of Newtown. Additionally, through this corridor, what's shown with crosshatched in blue is a very large wetland corridor. So from a preservation standpoint, you know, the only way that this corridor could potentially be impacted is if the Wetlands Commission and this commission approved some wholesale development in this large pocketed wetland, which again is very unlikely. Additionally, you know, we talk about these vernal pools and the ability to go from pool to pool. You know, this vernal pool here, there's a direct connection from this pool down this wooded area to other wetlands which are owned in, other wetlands which are in this location here. And I can tell you, if you've ever drive down Fan Hill Road during the spring, just based on the sound alone, I could, if I was a betting man, I would provide almost certainty that there are also additional cryptic vernal pools in this wetland itself. So there's also, in addition to, you know, what may happen under existing conditions from here to here, we believe that also exists from this location to this location too. Additionally, for this pool, there's a large extension for the correct terrestrial habitat to the northeast, and there's areas in this location here again which are undeveloped.
The wetland's not the terrestrial habitat.
It is, because, and I would argue that the forested wetland that exists out here is such where those salamanders or frogs will migrate through those areas. They're not going to avoid it because it's designated as wetland. So I would argue that you can't include that in terrestrial habitat. And I don't, and there's the guidance documents provided by the Army Corps, Casey and Clemens and everything else, do not say that forested wetlands do not meet the definition of terrestrial habitat.
It's the upland terrestrial habitat.
I disagree with you.
Well, wetlands aren't terrestrial. But, wetlands aren't terrestrial habitat.
I have not seen any guidance
Wetland
documents.
habitat.
Okay, again,
Wetland and terrestrial are two different things.
we've provided,
I get it.
we've provided sufficient documentation that shows how our proposed development incorporates the best management practices from the guidance documents provided, in addition to expert testimony from Bill Kenny, our soil scientist, which reinforces our position and says that our proposed development provides substantial terrestrial habitat for the vernal pool obligate species which exist here, and the change from our currently proposed development plan, potential development plan, to the previously approved by this commission potential development plan will not have a substantive impact to the obligate species in these vernal pools.
I know you submitted that.
And there has been no expert testimony on the record to contest that by a certified soil scientist or professional engineer.
Is there any,
Soil scientist has nothing to do with wetland biological habitat.
A biologist does,
Yeah.
which Bill Kenny is.
Yeah, I understand. Not a soil scientist.
I just feel like,
Not a soil scientist.
I feel like you're discounting the expert testimony that's been
I didn't
presented.
discount it, there's always counterpoints, and the point I was making is the wetland is not the upland terrestrial habitat, which is the critical habitat where these critters that come out of the vernal pool live.
So
It's upland habitat, it is not
a
wetland.
cryptic vernal pool embedded in a wetland does not change the fact that the 750-foot radius from that pool itself exists.
I'll give you another example. If you have in the 750-foot radius meadow, that also is not critical terrestrial habitat.
Correct, because they want forested, they want
Right.
shade.
That's right.
Yes.
It's the upland forest where these species dominantly live. And that is their critical habitat. I don't say they don't use the wetlands, I'm not saying they don't go into the wetlands. It is the forested uplands, which is their critical habitat.
Do you have any, I can testify to what I've read in regards to the guidance documents. I have not seen any evidence to support that particular statement. So,
That is
because,
what they say in the best management practices.
so,
That's what terrestrial habitat is.
okay, so
Terrestrial
for,
habitat is not wetland.
it's forested, and that's where they
Forested
live.
wetlands. It's not
Okay.
terrestrial habitat. If you understand.
I think we'll have to
the genus-
respectfully disagree on
okay,
this.
The genus of biology, terrestrial habitats are not wetlands. The wetlands are developed into terrestrial and to the wetlands. Those are two different ways that biology separates,
Okay.
you know.
I'll have to defer to the memorandum provided by our experts
It's
in
even
regards
called
to this.
upland terrestrial, it's called upland terrestrial habitat.
Well, it is, but if you have a cryptic,
Wetland.
if you have a cryptic vernal pool, right? If you have a cryptic vernal pool, which is embedded in a larger wetland, okay? And from that wetland, there could be an instance where that wetland extends to the full 750 feet of that limit.
So
So,
there is no terrestrial upland habitat in that situation.
well, I don't believe that to be the case, and I don't think the Army Corps' documentation supports that.
I suggest that
sure it
I
does.
suggest that we take time to review these documents. Let's get some input from wetlands, and we can further discuss this, because we're going to be continuing this to our next meeting.
One question though, on the previously approved application, was there attention to the vernal pool problem on the previously approved application?
It was discussed, but again, this property has been subject to several re-subdivision approvals since dating back to 2009.
The
So
one you referred to, the most recent.
the most recent, there was some discussion about it. We received in the wetlands approval, and we received planning and zoning approval regarding these vernal pools. I think there was a lot of discussion and thought put into this from an overall planning standpoint, from the initial concept of this business park dating back to 2002. So as these approvals have progressed over the years, we did put thought into it. However, the level of was not required as part of previous approvals. However, we have provided it as part of this application. And in addition to that, we have provided some tables which demonstrate some of the both the vernal pool envelope and the critical terrestrial habitat disturbance. Again, the previously approved application had an overall disturbance of about 43% of that critical terrestrial habitat. The current application, potential development plan, shows about 47%. So it is a slight increase, but again, as provided in the expert's report, Bill Kinney, he says that slight increase will not have an adverse impact on the overall vernal pool obligate species based on what was previously approved.
So the change between what's previously approved and the proposed, that change from 42 to 47 is not going to have an adverse impact, but we know that from 25 to 42 it does have an adverse.
Well, but again, I'd refer back to some of the Army Corps guidance documents regarding these corridors, because
Right. Yeah, you could go on to that next. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
sure, no, and I talked about it a little bit, but so, we've included, there's two supporting studies in our memorandum which talk about how you handle or how you should look at for the best management practices associated with this corridor. And what they say is that when you draw just a straight ring, it doesn't necessarily equate to how these obligate species actually migrate. And as I said, if you can provide a link to other terrestrial habitat where they may live and do whatever they do, then you will not, then there is not evidence that it will have the wholesale impact as if you just draw that circular ring. So, and again, these species can migrate up to a mile. We've demonstrated that, and we have over 262 miles, or 262 acres of additional habitat where they can live that are connected through corridors.
That's true, but the analysis and studies will also tell you that you can't really initially direct them to a corridor. Over time, if they survive, they may find that and adapt. But the studies on salamander specifically, when they try to chase the migrate routes, they differ from year to year. Sometimes they don't even occur. They'll go here this year, they go here next year. So, and over time, I would agree that, you know, whatever there is and they're surviving, they will adapt to ecology does that. But it doesn't happen just because we provide a path.
Okay, well, again, I'd refer back to the Army Corps guidance document, which is dated January 2015 for the vernal pool best management practices, which is included as part of our memo, which provides that additional discussion with corridors. Is there any, does the commission want to hear any more about the vernal pools or offer and have
I
any
think we
questions? I'd be
really-
happy to talk about
I
it.
think we really need an opportunity to read the documents that you've provided.
Great.
So we can then more intelligently discuss what's here.
Sure. And
Is that table in your document?
it was in, it was supposed to be an appendice, but it was submitted as part of the digital record of our presentation.
We didn't get that.
No, and we will provide that. It was supposed to be an appendice to our memorandum, and that it was referenced in the Bill Kenny report. Yes. Yep. And again, just another point, that this table is related to the potential development plan, which again is going to be subject to individual application for each property. So when we look at the actual subdivision of what we're doing, the actual impact from a road standpoint is not what's shown on this table, is not what's shown in our overall memorandum in terms of what that potential impact may be. We did this based on the potential development plan, which again is subject to additional permits not only from this commission but also in the wetlands as each individual lot's going to be developed. So I just wanted to say that again for the record.
That's
So-
based on the potential development plan? this
Yes.
building?
Yes, this is based on the potential development plan
So the
disturbance.
previously approved, okay, but it's also the previously approved development plan?
Correct.
Not
That's-
any improved, but.
No, it's the previously approved potential development plan. Those are the two comparisons that we had to draw from.
The potential development plan that was part of the previous application,
Correct.
not.
Previously approved. Right.
Not-
Well, it was a potential
I know,
development
just
plan
changing the
shown.
semantics of your words.
Yep.
Correct.
Do you think that Mr. Kenny can come and talk to us?
I could say, yeah, I'm sure we could have him do that if you'd like that additional testimony on the record.
Yeah, because if we have some questions to ask him, I
Sure.
think would be
Yeah.
appropriate.
You can certainly arrange that.
Okay.
This plan just kind of shows a blow-up of our landscape plan, and one of the things we wanted to highlight was the additional mitigation plantings that's shown in the, it's sort of restorative in terms of the temporary impact associated with the bridge crossings and the crane mat crossings. We did provide some additional detail for an under drain in one of the water quality basins to address one of Scott's comments, which is shown here, and it's incorporated into our grading drainage plan. We did provide some further clarification regarding the location of stone wall relocations in between the two bridge crossings. The stone wall relocations that were shown as part of the previous approval, what we've provided here is consistent with what was previously approved by this commission and Wetlands Commission. And again, it's based on the availability of stone walls throughout the property. What we found out is that over the years, it seems as if people have just kind of showed up and backed their truck up and have slowly picking apart the stone walls that used to be here, and all that's left is maybe one course of an old foundation. So when we actually look at what's actually available in terms of us to relocate, this is where we've ended up. And again, this is consistent with the previous approval.
Relocate or rebuild?
relocate and rebuild.
And you don't.
Right, yeah, yes, sorry if that was not clear.
That's all right.
One of the other comments from Scott is we did provide a catch basin top that incorporates the Cape Cod curbing. I think in Scott's wetland comments, he said we should incorporate this catch basin top so we don't have to detail a transition. I think in the planning and zoning comments, he actually asked for us to detail the transition. So I think this reflects both, or I think it addresses Scott's comment regarding the transition. There's another comment regarding site distance, which again, we can show and demonstrate. Now, with that, I don't want to belabor all of the comments, but there are a couple I wanted to touch on just to make sure that we can get feedback from the commission if you feel strongly about some of these comments. I'll start with Scott's comments. These are the ones that I think were issued today or yesterday. Today. I think we got them today.
Not much change in those, they were just
Yeah.
reissued because of the formal submission you made, the one sheet.
Right. And I'm not going to touch on all of them, but for one, layout, general or technical B, layout number 2. The roadway profile plan should include the plotting of ledge and the water table. I wanted to see if the commission felt strongly about this. This is not something that's required under your subdivision regulations or your zoning regulations, and it was not required as part of the previous approvals for this property. We've provided, we've done some test pits in the area. We think we have a relatively good idea of what we're going to be encountering, but to sufficiently provide that full detail would require some additional extensive testing. So I want to see if the commission felt strongly about that, if you felt this was imperative. However, we do not think it is. It's not required under the regulations, and we feel that the overall, what we've designed, again, is consistent with what's been previously approved.
I'll just provide a little clarification because it is not something that I normally ask for. The reason I was looking for more information on that is because it's got some extensive cuts. And when I found that during construction, when you have cuts and there's ledge and water in those embankments that are going to be provided, in the past I've had experience with because of slides and erosion and bleed out of the groundwater into the embankments that go down to the road, under drains in the roadway. And it would be nice to know or have a better idea of what we're headed into before it ends up happening at construction, the time of construction.
But isn't that something that could be handled as a construction modification?
It is, and
if
that's what
required?
typically that's what we have been doing. I didn't know if they had that information. I assume that if they're building a road and they're doing a cut to that degree, that they would have had to do borings already. So I was assuming that the information was already available. And I figured better to know heading into this that, hey, they need to put under drains in, they need to put a drainage, some type of a collection or treatment system in the embankments, that kind of thing. But that's basically why I put that in there.
Mr. Solly, is any of this information available currently?
It is not, and we did discuss this during the last application, and we actually provided some additional notes on the drawings, which was acceptable at the last go-round, which we've incorporated as well, and I'll refer to you sheet 4.31. There's a note just above the roadway with a big box around it that says, install stone trench drain at any potential groundwater bleeds, direct the discharge to nearest sediment trap during construction and catch basins. So we talked about this in the past. We theorized how we could address this from a plan standpoint. We've implemented that in accordance with what was previously approved. So I think we've adequately addressed that. But I just wanted to see if it was something the commission felt strongly about.
Anyone have any strong feelings?
What recourse would there be if they choose not to follow your recommendation?
Well, just what he said, during construction, what will happen is any issues will get uncovered, and then they're going to have to deal with it at the time. That may change some the measures that are taken to address that. I just got a little bit more concerned this time because the cut is more than before. You know, the cut's more and the sloping is it's pretty big. It depends upon the type of material. I mean, I've seen material over ledge when there's water, slide and move around a lot. And I've had problems in the past with things like that. I was just trying to avoid that. It is something we can do during construction. I'm not saying.
Well, and they have made a notation on the plans that
Well,
we're
that's what I'm saying,
reviewing,
yeah.
that if these situations exist, they will handle it in
Right,
such a
so I
fashion.
think the fact that you brought it to our attention in that way is probably gonna be added.
Yeah, and there was.
I think so.
There was one last reason, with the added cut and with the added area there, having that information on the plan allows me to assess what the cost is when I go to do the bond,
Oh,
because
okay.
they're just throwing a number at me,
Well,
And
I think, Scott, that if you don't have the information, you have to assume it's all ledge.
Okay, I could do that, because rock excavation is very expensive, and that bond is gonna just go.
It's just all,
I know they can do it.
what are your thoughts?
They can do it at a
Well,
price.
I think,
that's much
I
lower.
think, through our work on previous applications, we've collectively been able to come up with estimates to reflect those exact things when we were preparing the bond estimate. I know we probably didn't necessarily agree exactly, but I think we got to a place where we felt comfortable and you felt comfortable. I think we can work together on that. And I think, I'd prefer not to have Scott make an assumption that 100% of the removal is going to be rock, because I don't believe that to be the case. And I think that would.
Do you have any test pits
We
along the-
do, and we can
you
probably.
extrapolate ledge quantities?
We absolutely do, and we can certainly
Scott?
provide that. I just
So
didn't
what we'll
think.
do is we'll work together on that. If we don't agree on the quantity, then we'll talk about further testing, further test pits or whatever. So we can work, I'm
Sure.
assuming we come up with an agreement, it will be good. Because you have to
Everybody,
provide the bond form anyway.
Everybody
Which
pretty much
we
in
have.
agreement with that?
We have.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, great, thank you. I think that was the only one on Scott's comment that I wanted to really focus on. I think some of the other ones are we can work through. I guess grading along the proposed bridge wing wall should be revised to 2-to-1 maximum slope unless a steeper slope is specifically accepted by the commission. This is something that we've specifically requested, and it's been designed in accordance with the previous approvals. We're looking at a 1-to-1 stabilized riprap slope only immediately adjacent to those wing walls. This was previously approved as part of the past applications.
Can you explain that a little more for us?
Sure. So we have these, so the bridge crossing here, and we have concrete wing walls which come out on either end, which basically can serve as almost like a concrete retaining wall to make the transition up between finished grade of the roadway in this location and existing grade on the downhill side of the bridge. So basically in these areas here, we're proposing a steeper slope with riprap stabilization. You can see this hatch here. So that riprap is what provides that additional reinforcing to make sure that slope is stable. And again, this is consistent with what was previously approved, not only for this particular property, but all of the other bridge crossings in the park all have similar treatments for these types of situations. So we felt this was appropriate, and and what it does is it actually reduces the potential impact to wetlands and upland review area, because it allows us to make this grade up in a shorter time frame rather than extending these contours out and actually proposing more disturbance closer to the wetland edge than what we're currently proposing. So unless the commission feels strongly that you aren't inclined to approve the steeper stabilized riprap slope, we could revise this grading, but we didn't necessarily feel.
So you're saying the steeper slope has less impact on the wetlands?
Yes, it does.
And the Wetlands Commission has acknowledged that. I put that in because the commission needs to accept the fact that it doesn't,
Right.
that it's steeper than your regulations.
What's the general consensus on that?
How long is it gonna last?
Oh, in perpetuity.
Well,
Yeah, that's what the riprap provides, armor stabilization to make sure that's stable and long-term.
Does anyone have any issues with that?
No.
Okay. It sounds like the commission is in agreement with that.
Great, thank you very much. I think a lot of the other ones we can work through with Scott. I don't, there wasn't anything of substance there. In regards to Will's comments, I do want to, I think we talked at length about the proposed lot configuration for lot 29. I think we've adequately addressed that comment and what we're proposing to our revisions to our subdivision plan. We did establish and talk about these waivers, the waiver of street tree planting, the waiver of provision of the sidewalks, and the waiver of maximum side slope standards. Again, all of these waivers are consistent with what was previously approved for a re-subdivision application on the same property. And we feel that it's adequate. We can certainly provide a letter in writing to do so, but we think that what we provided is appropriate.
Well, Will notes here that the applicant should provide a formal written request.
I think we have. I think that was established in either our initial cover letter for the application or our narrative. I'm confident that it's formally in writing in some of our application materials.
If not, you will provide it.
We're happy to provide a
It's not
letter.
just requesting it, it's saying how you meet the standards of the subdivision regulation, so they can grant you.
Again, I believe that's in the narrative because, again, we provided things that's been consistent with the previous approvals issued for this project, but we're happy to do that to satisfy.
We might just need a letter requesting a waiver.
Happy to do that. Number 4 from Will's latest memo, the draft proposed legal instruments. We talked about this at the last hearing. So as part of the previous approval, we've provided formal executable documents ready to convey all of the drainage easements, warranty deeds, sightline easements, slope rights easements that were required as part of the previous approval. So the form of those documents has been established, reviewed by both the town planner and the town attorney and deemed acceptable. What we would prefer to do is, if we get this subdivision approved, we can then provide those same exact previously approved forms with the updated information. We'd prefer to not have to provide those now because of time associated with preparing those instruments and those documents. So we already have a form that's been reviewed and approved by staff and council. We think those forms are acceptable to be implemented as part of this application. We would just prefer to provide those as a condition of approval and not during the application process or during the application process.
Will?
Given the fact that we did go through them, there isn't any new ones, right?
Correct. They're all, yes.
And the only thing that changed is maybe some of the locations, right?
Correct. Some of the geometric configurations, the legal descriptions, things like that.
I mean, I'm a proponent of having these things up front, but given that we did go through them already, I'm not as uncomfortable here. We probably should put a copy at least of where they are. The ones today are good.
Well, they're all shown on the subdivision plan.
No, I know, I was gonna say the legal instruments, but that's not gonna do any good because they're not correct. So I'm fine.
Since you have a base document that you're going to be working from and just modifying.
Yeah, I think it's just the location, the area that's changing, it's not the substance. And
Correct.
That's why I want them
So
using
you're not opposed to making it a condition of
No,
approval?
I'm
Okay.
not, in this instance, no.
All right, great. And then number 5, the common driveway access easement. I think that's, we've provided it so that we can provide additional access to these lots without having, each individual property having 2 curb cuts, which may be needed for, geometric constraints or things like that. But again, in his comment, I think individual lot applications are going to be really the opportunity to talk about access and things like that. So, we're providing a provision for an access easement here, which could provide access to both this lot and this lot. The current potential development plan doesn't even actually depict that, so it would just be 2 driveways for this particular facility.
Well, that was what kind of calmed me a little bit too, was that you're providing, which is good. I think it's good having the shared access. Having fewer curb cuts is even better. But then in this potential development plan, the easement is really only giving it to the other lot. So it's not, all it's doing is making that lot bigger at the cost of the other lot. So, because they're not using it. The lot that has it on it isn't using it. I know it's only potential development, but if it's a common driveway, it'd be nice if they kind of both showed that they used it, and we can deal with that at the development plan.
That was my primary
It's just
point, is I
kind of
wanted
weird
to,
that it's, and again, ideally, it'd be better if that was the only driveway.
I think the best time to really focus on this is during the individual lot application.
I agree.
And then his last comment was regarding the vernal pool conservation, and I think we've kind of belabored that point a little bit this evening. And I'd be happy to give the commission a chance to kind of review the information provided, and we can discuss in a little more detail at the next hearing, and we can certainly see if Bill Kenny can be available for that as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the commission may have.
Start down at the end.
Most of my questions have to do with the pools, so I personally myself will go over that information and have better knowledge on that for the next time we meet.
Great, thank you.
Other than that, I'm all set.
Great.
I feel the same as Commissioner Mayini. As for the legal instruments, I think they can be done as a condition of approval. If I may just ask one question about the pools.
Of course.
Do you have a calculation between the previously approved plan and the current one, the difference in disturbance?
Yes, and that's what's actually depicted on this table.
It's on, okay.
Yes.
But we don't have that.
We
yet.
will be getting that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was all I had then.
I have a question regarding the revised plan that will, according to you, negate the dispute about the rear lot. Has Will had a chance to see that yet?
He has not,
He has
again,
not. Okay, then that was my question.
Well, I just saw it when he showed it, and if it's 150 feet, it's good, it's totally,
right.
So that will meet the criteria.
it would address what is my comment.
Yes, okay, and that's it.
On the engineer's comments,
Mhm.
under grading 3, we didn't discuss it. You went right over that.
I think it was inadvertent. You know, I mean, a lot of the specifics regarding this is included in our narrative and our engineering report, but we can certainly discuss it more at length this evening if it pleases the commission. Yes, this project does result in a net export of material, and it will require processing of that material.
Do you have an approximate number on that?
It's in our engineering report. I don't have it off the top of my head. It is in our engineering report, in the,
That's all right, never mind.
there's a discussion regarding our excavation. It's at the end of our report on page 9. This will require approximately 120,000 cubic yards of material to be removed from the property.
100 what?
120,000 cubic yards.
And you don't know how much ledge?
I don't off the top of my head at this point. I mean, we can, as we discussed, we can do some interpolations based on some of our test pits that we do have, and we can make some assessments based on that. We can provide that information to the commission.
Okay, so,
You know, in terms of processing the material, blasting operations, et cetera.
I would,
So
that's what I'm interested in.
Yep, so of course, as the commission's aware, the regulations do allow for the processing of materials in industrial districts, provided that you're 500 feet from a residential zone. There are opportunities on this property for us to be able to do that. It would have to be done in accordance with, you know, standard operating procedures regarding dust suppression, et cetera. The blasting operations would have to be done in accordance with the permitting requirements from the fire marshal. Transport of material, the material would be excavated and removed from this property ultimately as part of an export. Dewatering would be handled in accordance with the Soil Erosion Sediment Control Plan and the Soil Erosion Sediment Control Manual provided by DEEP. You know, destination of material, travel route, potential needed permits, et cetera, you know, that kind of happens as a matter of construction where wherever that material needed to be exported, it could vary from day to day. But the path would be through the industrial park onto Pepper Street and then down Route 25 or up Route 25, whether it's going south or north.
I don't think it can go south on Pepper Street.
No, excuse me, it would go out Pepper Street to Route 25,
Then south and
then
north.
south or
Gotcha.
then north, yes. Yeah, you're correct. There's actually signage on when you're coming out of Cambridge Drive, it does say trucks turn right, and it does discourage people from turning left onto Pepper Street, and obviously traveling through those back roads.
Residential.
Right.
Anything else, Leon?
Well, that's why I think that we need to know how much ledge.
No, he'll provide us with some calculations at our next meeting.
All right,
Yes, in advance of the next meeting.
okay.
Anything else, Leon?
No,
Okay.
Nothing to add.
Well, did wetlands have any specific,
Sorry, I just had
did the Wetlands Commission have any specific comments regarding the disagreement that you and Will had regarding the vernal pools and wetlands?
I wouldn't call it I wouldn't characterize it as a disagreement. We had a lot of discussion about the vernal pools and what we were doing, and you know, it's always tricky to accommodate or address vernal pools, especially in this situation, because again, it's a little bit challenging because, you know, when the applicant initially purchased this property in 2002, the original desire was to do a golf course and a residential development. And both both commissions said, we don't want that, we want an industrial park. We want to develop it as an industrial park, we want to add to the commercial tax base, and that was the direction given. So throughout the years, as phases were approved and constructed, you know, management practices were put in place. I can assure you that what we're proposing is a far improvement from what was previously done in this area. We've incorporated a number of best management practices. As I stated, we have Cape Cod curbing. You know, we've limited development. We've looked at the drainage analysis. We've maintained watersheds to these wetlands to ensure that we're not going to be impacting the water. You know, the stormwater. We provided water quality measures, things like that. So there was extensive discussion regarding it. And again, we also have to refer back to the fact that this property was recently subject to an approval by both the Wetlands Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission for development of not only the subdivision road, but also a potential development plan, which accompanied that application as required. You know, there was a lot of discussion. And I think that's one of the reasons why I had to submit the extension letter this evening, is because our discussion started as far back as June, and we've been having ongoing discussions throughout the duration of the public hearings. I think, you know, at the hearing last night, I think there was a general comfort level that we've exhausted the discussions. We've provided everything that they've requested regarding the analysis. We've made modifications to our potential development plan so that it does reduce the risk. You know, one of the components of individual lot development is when we bring in individual lot development applications, as Scott actually pointed out at one of the hearings, was the potential development plan could be one of those alternatives. And the Wetlands Commission was very cautionary in that they didn't want us to perceive an approval of the subdivision as an automatic approval for what's shown on the potential development plan. We showed what we showed because we didn't want to mislead anybody about what we're proposing as part of this, the development of this property. We wanted to be transparent, and we wanted to do our analysis to demonstrate that we put careful consideration and thought into what we're doing, and we're trying to incorporate as many best management practices as we could. You know, the provision regarding, you know, maintain 75% of the critical terrestrial habitat is undisturbed is one of the best management practices that's established. It is not the critical paramount, or it is not the end-all be-all. It is one of the recommendations that the Army Corps provides. And again, the Army Corps itself provides additional guidance documents for looking at corridors and looking at those and what those can provide for these vernal pools versus the historic analysis of just this overall 750-foot radius. So, you know, we did discuss it a lot. We talked about it quite a bit. I do feel that we adequately addressed it. If we didn't, I wouldn't feel comfortable of having the hearing closed last evening, but I think we've provided everything that they've asked for. I think we've done the best that we can given the situation that we have.
Thank you.
Michael?
Well, I understand that it's impossible for you to develop this property and leave the 750-foot buffer there. So on this map that you provided, and Corps of Engineers calls this directional buffer. But we don't really have a definition in our regulations for directional buffers. That's a nice term, but we don't really know what that means as far as enforcement. We have to decide if these lots are appropriate. Do you have there's other things you can call this on the plan. You could call it, you could put lot clearing restrictions in this area that you're talking about directional buffers. You could put easements in that area so that we're reassured that when the proposal comes in to develop these lots, that these are already in place. That we're not going to say, well, we'll worry about it when that comes around. That, you know, that we're going to leave these directional buffers in there, whatever that means. So I just was wondering if you could give consideration to lot clearing restrictions or easements in these areas that you've delineated here already, which does give a north and a south exit for the amphibians.
We can certainly discuss that with the applicant.
Okay.
Michael, anything else?
No, thanks.
Okay. I don't have any comments at this time. I would like to review the information you provided and
Great.
talk about it at the next meeting.
Wonderful.
Let me just open it up to the floor real quick, see if
That's right.
anyone in the audience has any comments. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this application? Seeing none, is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this application? Does anyone have any general questions or comments? Okay, Mr. Solly, back to you. No?
Oh. Should have jumped up and said in favor. Just again, we appreciate the commission's consideration, and again, we provided a letter to extend the public hearing, and we look forward to seeing you in September. The Wetlands Commission is on the 13th, I believe, which would put us next before you on the 21st of September.
Oh, so you don't want to, so you won't be coming back on the 7th, it will be continued to the 21st.
We won't have the wetlands referral until then, so.
So,
Okay. We'll see you on September 21st. Thank you. All right, it is now 8:11 PM. We'll move on to item number 6.
Just before I step down, just one of the things that we talked about doing with wetlands, and I think would actually probably be a great idea for planning and zoning too, is when we give our presentations, we always save a copy of that digital record onto your laptop so the town has record of it. One of the things that we talked about doing was actually, as a matter of course, at the end of a hearing, marking the record to show that as a digital exhibit so that it's saved and it's clearly documented in the record that this digital presentation has been submitted as part of our overall record. I think that might be a good idea because I'm going to save this to the desktop as well, as we always do. And I just think that may be a good matter of course for the commission to consider for establishing the record and including the digital record of what we do present.
Okay. Will, any comment?
No, I mean, it's also on the camera, so.
Okay.
Yeah, video recording.
Thank you, Mr. Silver.
Thank you.
All right, Planning and Zoning Commission, Monroe, Connecticut, notice of public hearing to be held August 24th, 2017. SCP 2017-08, file number 1591A, 178 Main Street, tax assessor map 19, lot 02. Special exception permit application, proposed expansion of existing car wash, relocation of canopy, installation of payment kiosk, parking, self-serve vacuums, and stormwater management controls. Soundview Capital Partners LLC, owner applicant, Complete details and copies of all related materials associated with the above matters are on file and available for viewing in the Monroe Planning and Zoning Department offices. Will, what do we have for exhibits?
Exhibit 1, special exception permit application. Exhibit 2, soils and wetlands report. Exhibit 3, storm drainage report. Exhibit 4, plan set. Exhibit 5, topographic survey. Exhibit 6, town engineer comments. Exhibit 7, town planner comments. Exhibit 8, building official comments. Exhibit 9, fire marshal comments. Exhibit 10, Monroe Car Wash Detail Center. Exhibit 11, photographs of vacuum system details. Exhibit 12, XPT elevation. Exhibit 13, floodplain development information. Exhibit 14, updated plan set. Exhibit 15, commission submission and special permit application materials, as well as a wetlands report for commission. Exhibit 17, updated storm drainage report. Exhibit 18, updated town engineer comments. Exhibit 19, updated planner comments. Exhibit 20, updated town engineer comments. Exhibit 21, plan set. Exhibit 22, notice certificate of decision by the Inland Wetlands Commission. Exhibit 23, updated town engineer comments. That's all I have. Do you have the green card from Tracy? So exhibit 24 is the green card receipt for public hearing notice to neighbor.
Okay, for the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Jim Swift, professional engineer, landscape architect at 102 Village Drive in Shelton. Just to go over this very quickly with the commission, it may look familiar. We have a project, this is the existing car wash that's located on 178 Main Street. And this was the subject of previous approvals about a year ago. It was approved by Inland Wetlands and this commission back in July 7th of 2016. At that time, we did have a proposed building addition that went along with the proposal, and what happened was a lot of the structures and things, once we priced them out, we couldn't afford them. So long story short, it's back to the drawing board. And we reduced the proposal back down to what were some of the essential services that this development needs to stay alive as a functioning car wash. And primarily those are self-service vacuums and some other things that have to do with efficiency. This, oops. What you see on the plan now, up on the wall is the existing condition right now. We have the existing car wash facilities, some parking out front with a tent that covers the staff that puts final shining and cleaning on the cars. And you can see a traffic pattern leading towards the back of the site where the entry to the car wash facility is. Now I'm going to need to get rid of a lot of these labels. Comments. Should be in comments, isn't it? It's in there.
Okay, let's go.
It's the second one down. If you go back to that last comments box, it's the second one down.
Click that.
Click that.
Show. Hide all
Highlight all
comments.
comments. Good, very good. So we are on track. The full screen is.
Are you trying to? Just use the magnifying glass. And draw a box.
You want to zoom in on the center part, is that what you want? Or you left it?
Well, I'll go with the general, and then as we want to zoom in, we can do that. So this plan shows the overall site plan that we are proposing now that was submitted with the package for the commissioners. Again, this is substantially the same project as was approved by the Commission and the Wetlands Commission in 2016. The majority of the change is to delete the proposed building, which is in this general location. So what we've done is we've added a handicap space up in the corner of the building here, which is right at the door to the existing building. We're proposing to relocate the existing tent that's located here now over around the corner and behind a small landscaped island in this location. Construct a new parking lot in here, and you can see the darker pavement areas is new pavement. The lighter areas are existing impervious. And we're going to, excuse me, eliminate this driveway connection that leads over to where the existing entry is. So the existing entry onto the site for customers is still in the same place. This is the existing driveway. It comes in down to this location, comes down to where the staff right now takes in and process people for their car wash. And those are in the same general space, of course. There's a little bit of minor widening right here, but of not much account. And the same as the previous proposal, we are proposing a rain garden that's located in this location. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that in the grading areas. Down in this rear location of the site, right now, as I say, we have a tent and some movable payment kiosks. And what we're proposing there is to install permanent payment kiosks, which are detailed in some of the drawings that you have. We're also proposing to relocate the existing dumpster, which is kind of standing all by itself out in the corner of the site here in the rear, and we're going to locate that over in this location behind some parking spaces, and we're going to enclose that with fence and some landscaping, as is normally done. We are proposing a loading space waiver, which is provided for by the regulations. There are maybe some spaces that we could show it, but we really don't have the kind of an operation where we have trucks coming in any kind of a frequency at all. We don't have those kinds of deliveries, so we're asking for that waiver. This is the grading plan, which, again, the area is substantially on grade. This is our area of our proposed pavement, substantially on grade, no massive grading changes or anything of the like in that vicinity. Coming down to the rain garden, down in this location, this is, it serves the environmental aspect of the site to try and protect the Pequannock River, which is located, of course, right down here along our eastern border. We have a very small fill, and let me just go back because I didn't draw that blue line. This blue line that runs up the site, down around and down here is the FEMA flood limit line. And apologies for not showing that on the grading. On the grading plan, but you can see it lightly drawn in this location here, coming back around. Since we're not changing any of the grades in this location, we're not asking for any fills, we're not providing any significant disturbance in that floodplain. The only area is this little bit of a corner right here where we're proposing some of the new pavement and the sidewalk. And that fill of the floodplain is perhaps 1 or 2 cubic yards. It's almost not measurable. And what we're doing with the rain garden is pure excavation. And so the result of that is in the floodplain area where we're looking for storage volume for water to flood in and provide that volume, is we're increasing the floodplain volume by about 1,700 cubic feet by excavating in that rain garden. The new pavement area here is directed down to a new inlet structure located in this location. It's a combination catch basin vortex type of unit that you see detailed on the side. Enters a pipe and flows across into the rain garden area. A little bit more about the features of the rain garden. This is a cross-section of that up in here. So this cross-section goes from our existing parking lot, right in this location. The existing condition is basically flat from that parking lot to the embankment of the Pequannock River. It comes down to the Pequannock River. That is an existing grade, and the Pequannock River located here. So you can see that the rain garden is excavated down into the ground there to provide that additional floodplain volume. All features of the rain garden are the same as the previous approvals, both for inland wetlands and for this commission back in July of 2016. And for the record, the plan that you are looking at now that's been submitted has been approved by the Inland Wetlands Commission sometime a few weeks ago. Erosion control plan is not very complicated. It's fairly simple. The entire site is generally pitched in a very flat direction down towards the Pequannock River. The whole ballgame here is protect the Pequannock River. We're going to do that by, according to the construction sequence, we're going to excavate the rain garden first. That's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to protect the rest of the construction limit line with filter fabric fence, and then as we're constructing, we're making sure that any flows get into that rain garden where they're protected and they're held in place for a bit. And then should any siltation or mud accumulate in that rain garden, it's very easy for us to flag it, take it out before it becomes problematical. So erosion control plan is fairly straightforward. Landscaping plan, we are creating just a little bit more impervious runoff. I can cover that in a little bit, but as far as the landscaping area, we are moving our tent from the front to the side. So this area right in this location has become a plant bed, and we're proposing some landscaping in there, some mix of some flowering almonds, some lacos, some ground covers, things like that. At our new sign up in this location, again, some ground covers around the sign. We are providing 4 trees. These are, I'd say, ornamental trees. They're not large shade trees. They're the gray dogwood. And the reason we chose those is because of the function that we're trying to accomplish here. This area, of course, is where the staff is doing drying, cleaning, that sort of thing. This area from this location down are the self-surface vacuums that people are going to come into right after getting out of the car wash area. And doesn't really lend itself to large shade trees that could make a mess, frankly, on people's cars that were just cleaned. As you come back, the rain garden is appropriately planted. It's planted with 2 different specific seed mixes. One for the side slope area that you saw in that section previously, and then the bottom area of the rain garden has a different seed mix that does much better in a bottom area that's going to remain wetter most of the time. Towards the back of the site, behind our existing pavement and our rain garden, and between us and the Pequannock River, we're providing a line of 3 different viburnum species. They're all native viburnum species. They will grow from branch heights very down to ground level, down to 12, 15 feet in height. And the reason for that is, back in the day when this was all constructed, there wasn't anything planted for that mid-story condition. We do have some pretty good existing trees, maples and things that are on our embankment to the Paquonic River, but we do have a few vines and some barberries that are invasives that are in there because there's nothing in that mid-story range. And so, again, for the inland wetlands, and last year we proposed these things to try and fill in that mid-story so that we give the Paquonic River a little bit more of a protection for those sorts of, for that situation. There are some comments that I got a day or two after submitting these plans 5 weeks ago. Some of them were fairly important. One was an error on my part, which was the way that the handicap walk was constructed. It didn't have the proper grades. So I have done some work to improve that, and I did some improvements on drawings that show some other things that Scott and Will had flagged, some additional landscaping, some stonework along this this line here, and I felt that the handicap space was fairly significant. So I did those drawings. I submitted them today. I know how the commission feels about receiving new drawings. I am prepared to show those drawings, but if the commission would prefer, we'll just leave that aside, and I'll leave my description as to what I've done for further discussion. And to go into some of the reports, if appropriate, I do have Scott's report, which I think I have fairly well settled, and I'll ask Scott to confirm that in a second. There was a few things that we would like to discuss with the commission. One is the question, one of the first things was a discussion as to whether there should be a walk in front of the site or not. There aren't any other walks either side of us. So if we did do a walk, we'd kind of be a lone walk here. So we haven't shown that, but again, we'll like to have a discussion with the commission on that as to what their feelings on that are. There are some minor technical deals that I believe in discussions with Scott I've satisfied that do need a little bit more documentation, but I believe Scott is satisfied on most of those issues, and I won't get into those. Those include grading, some of the stone stabilization, spot elevations, other things like that. The issue of a traffic and safety on C, there was an area plan provided, and the question Scott had was whether there was enough room to provide a dedicated turn lane on Route 25 on the site. And if you were to measure the dimensions of the center line stripe, the gutter line stripe, and the actual edge of pavement, those dimensions are 11 feet and 10 feet, which is a total of 21 feet. That's generally the dimension that ConDOT likes to go with as a minimum for a turning lane, so I believe that's already accomplished. I think it's there. And I'll leave it to Scott to...
Just a clarification now.
Go ahead.
Some of the other reasons why typically applications along the commercial corridors, they come in with an area plan or a traffic plan that shows the line striping. And the reason for that is more than just, I'm not necessarily saying it needed or didn't need a left turn lane, but sometimes there are corrections that are made at the time when you're doing driveway work relative to the lane striping. Bypass lanes, sometimes they may even ask the line striping to be shifted just to gain a foot in a bypass lane. Also to know where the other driveways are. So does the driveway line up? How does that line up with another driveway across the street, and how does that lane striping work and the left turns into the two places work? So typically we get a plan of the roadway in the general area that shows that so that when you get, and my goal is when you get to DOT, it avoids learning about some other problem after the fact, you know? A lot of times what we do is, once I get that, we'll actually even have a meeting, you, me, and the traffic engineer from DOT right at the site to make sure that we're all on the same page and don't have to do, I'm talking usually minor tweaks, but that's the reason why I asked for that.
Scott, if there's no changes in the right-of-way, do they have to go to DOT?
They have to go to DOT because they're doing work within the right-of-way, yes.
Correct.
They have to get in with an encroachment permit.
I didn't think that there was that much going on in the right-of-way.
Like a tiny triangle.
The curb cut's not changing, right?
The curb cut, one of, the comments are that, you know, one of the comments that you need to talk about is the curb cut. Another comment you need to talk about is the sidewalk. I don't have the plan out in front of me.
Right, but you're, excuse me, you're saying that right now it looks like they have a square corner in the curb going out in the right-of-way, and they're gonna pull that back to a radius curb, and just for that little bit,
Absolutely, DOT will require,
then why don't we just leave it?
because it's an improvement that needs to be done. Everybody wants to avoid DOT permits, encroachment permits. They're easy to get. They're not hard to get. It's just everybody's afraid to go to DOT for some reason. We've been to DOT, the
Well, no,
town's been.
hold on, we can figure, I mean, this is going away.
That's work that's gonna, so that's
So
excavation.
this is what you were talking about,
Right.
this is going away,
Right.
which is also in the DOT right
And anytime someone works in the right-of-way, just like the town right-of-way, we need permits so that we know that people have insurance.
Well, no, I didn't take into account the parking spaces that are going away.
Right, and some, you still have to talk about some of the other things that I'm talking about in terms of the, I might as well jump into it now. This layout, we've talked about this, and we've kind of gone back and forth about it, but this current layout has, what I'm saying here is, as the small truck comes out here, it can't make this turn. So when it comes out of the parking lot, it can't make the turn without crossing the yellow line. And I know that DOT has a new local traffic engineer, but my experience with the previous traffic engineer, and I thought with the new guy as well, was that their policy is they don't like to see vehicles crossing that yellow line because of the obvious hazard, a head-on collision coming the other way. So what I try to do is get applicants to change their layout so that they can get the truck out. If the truck's going northbound, what I suggested was shifting this down a space, shifting the space down, shifting this down, everything gets shifted down so that this island would come like this. It's hard to draw with this, but it would be an island that cuts across like this, so that the truck could start turning back this far and have room to turn out here without crossing the yellow line. The other option, which we talked about, and I respect that there are concerns about their operation here, because this is where they drive vehicles and they do some detailing, quick detailing as the cars come out. One of the options we talked about was, I know that DOT would like to get rid of this big, long driveway cut here. It would be to close this off, have the area a little bit more accessible and controllable for their detailing. They were worried about or concerned about, I guess there's potential rights of these people to cut across here and use this driveway. But what we were originally suggesting was have this driveway come straight out here. And that would allow the trucks and vehicles to come down here and then come right out, and you have full access both ways. That was an alternative, but it was a little bit problematic for, at least in our discussions for the
now.
property.
Oh, you took our discount?
Is our disc, yeah,
He took our.
let me put it back in.
not gonna work on that. Well, they have been memo, you can look at my memo. Scott's not working.
The sketch is,
I sketched it in my memo. That's what he was just articulating.
So those are things we talked about, and if the radius that I talked about were put in, this over here, this radius near the road, that could be cut back, so you wouldn't need this asphalt.
Couldn't that be cut back even in this scenario?
Even in this scenario, this could be cut back
It has
more,
no
so you
cur-
could
it has
get
no
more,
curve.
you could literally bring the curb like this, so you can get more green area here, and it'd be cheaper for you as far as your paving goes. So that's something we can do as well, but, you know, those are things we talked about, and for one reason or another, you know, I guess the property owner has needs too as far as the operation goes.
And, you know, from the detailing perspective, you know, my view was that you come right out here and the cars get kind of stacked up with the way it goes now. If you close that off and this is open here, not only do you have this area, now you have this area too, which is better controlled, it's inside the site, it's not handing out the exit, and this has free travel, because this is now competing with guys coming out and guys coming out of the vacuum. So if you're drying off cars here real quick and they're all hanging up in here, you're blocking it a little bit for the guys in the vacuum. If this was the entrance, you could do all that, and these guys have free reign. The truck has free reign. So from overall circulation, coming out here would address Scott's concern about the SU-30 turning, because it would be straight on. It would better circulate inside. It would get rid of this oversized thing. It doesn't eliminate their access at all. It actually makes it better because it separates it from, their other access is right here. There's a driveway right here, from that to there. So it makes it that much further away. This is a very small property. There's not a lot of traffic associated with this property. The difference is, you know, that's a permit with DOT, and how that pans out cost-wise, obviously it'd be a different cost than this plan, but, you know, it would overall be much better for it.
Yeah, so I know that the property owner did have some issues with that, so, relative to the neighbor and their operations.
John Lilly, the owner of Soundview Capital Partners, 23 Ridgebrook Road, Greenwich, Connecticut. I hired a company, Sonny's Corporation in Florida, that does site optimization and site development work for new car wash operations, to do a site evaluation and propose the best way for me to utilize the site. Their recommendation is reflected here. From a business operations perspective, we get chemical deliveries on average twice a month, and we have trash removal once a week. So that would be on a bi-weekly basis, 3 trucks using this spot against 2,500 cars on average using the site during that period of time. With the liquor store next door, when I had approached him about the idea of, you know, his customers primarily enter through, as you're facing his store, the right side, and sometimes they exit the same way. Most of the time they'll come around the little island and exit that way, which is my property, but it happens, and you know, that's just sort of how it goes. Splitting it into sort of 2 issues. With extending the property out here, when I showed that design to Sonny's Corporation, their concern was, in the plan they recommended, cars will come out straight here and they'll stack 2 or 3 across. Cars exiting will come over here and go into the outside lane to exit onto Route 25. If you have cars coming out here and turning to the right, you're going to have them stacking up side by side here, and then the interior cars here are going to have to cross in front of the exterior cars in order to get to 25.
John, I don't really mean to interrupt you, but that's actually not accurate. Because the suggestion of the way I sketched it out is they're not gonna be conflicted with or blocked. Because the cars stacking out of the car wash are, instead of it fronting on the street, like you
Instead
said
of going
here,
across here, yeah.
they're gonna be fronting at this edge. If you can visual, this being the edge, and the turnout is here. So you could have two cars queued up to go into the exit lane, and either one could go at either time without any conflict of any kind. It would be the same, it's almost the exact same situation you have here. It's just, it's gonna be skewed to the side. This would be free reign. This would not be blocked by any vehicles. So the point is that these guys have free reign, these guys have free reign. And right now, actually, your use here really is not really a good traffic solution because it's at the entrance, and it's more restrictive, it's at the entrance and exit, and, you know, it's not really where cars should be.
Yeah, this is all an exit area. Cars will only be entering the site from this location.
Yeah. There's no restriction on that as being an entrance only.
Yeah, we don't have a barrier. I mean, we have employees that are stationed out here that are drying the vehicles as they exit before they leave the property. But that's, you know, that's what Sonny's Corporation has advised me is the recommended way to go. You know, I've explained sort of the, you know, I think, you know, were we to do anything, you know, Sonny said, you know, you don't want to sort of spook customers, you want to give them latitude. If we have to do something here, what I would propose is we do what Scott had recommended, moving this down, angling the island here, and creating more of a buffer here to force the trucks to go around if, you know, it's believed that, you know, the 3 trucks on a bi-weekly basis is worth sort of inconveniencing the 2,500 cars.
Yeah, I mean, that design, if the commission was interested in that, should look at that, because, and I've seen a sketch of that, and it has other impacts to the site that ripple down to the whole parking lot, which
Scott, do you
have
have
other
a
issues.
sketch of what you were
Yeah,
planning?
we have it right here. No, there's one from Scott that you don't have.
Just the
Yeah,
one.
Jim, you don't.
That's mine.
Just the one.
Oh,
But the suggestion that
I
Scott
have in
has
your
to get the
report.
SU-30 to come around
No,
here,
no, you're right. I didn't bring,
hold on, that would change this whole thing, shift the tent down. It then impacts the parking space. You lose a parking space unless you pick it up in here, and then that changes this whole, so it has a ripple effect to other things on the site that need to be evaluated as well.
So, yeah,
but I think we would not have so much of a problem on that. I mean, you know, we have to take our professional designers for how these things work pretty much at their word. And there's 2 issues. I mean, you know, one is Scott has designed on his plan is basically similar to what you're looking at in Will's first sketch on his comments, except with the addition, as Scott was saying, is that you drag all these things down. You don't lose any parking spaces, but you just change the angle of this curve, and then you change the angle of this curve very much as Will's first sketch was. We think it's sort of a solution in search of a problem, because we don't really get the trucks, we don't have any problems, nobody's, you know, there's been no complaints or anything like that. We appreciate the point that whenever these things come up, you're always looking for, you know, can I improve something? But in this case, the improvement is well, it is what it is. But
So,
we
Mr.
would not
Swift,
have
Mr.
so much
Swift,
as.
Mr. Swift, are you saying that you would be agreeable to move the canopy down,
Yes,
reconfigure that island,
yes,
reconfigure the front island by the street to create a little more green space out there?
yes,
You're in agreement with that?
yes.
I really think you should see what that is before you,
Um,
someone should sketch
okay,
that.
that, yeah.
Because like I
that would
said, it
be fine.
ripples
That
up
would
a
be
thing.
fine. Because the second point is, it's correct, that, you know, Scott's correct, you know, nobody needs to be in fear of death of going to the district for DOT. Having said that, there's a big difference between, we're gonna do a little curb work and we're gonna take pavement out of your right-of-way to completely realigning an entrance to a business. I mean, I'm not saying.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm
That
not
is
saying
a
that,
difference.
you know, it's not doable,
Yep.
but it's a bigger deal, make no mistake about that. So, you know.
Sometimes they really are
Yeah,
eager to see that, and other times they're kind of don't want to see it.
Well, if they view it as the improvement that it could be for the internal circulation and
Right.
the driveway cut,
I agree,
it's a positive thing, it's not a negative.
I agree.
What we should have done was we should have had a meeting with DOT a long time ago to discuss this.
We were hoping not to go to DOT,
Well, see, that's
but
the
that,
problem.
that ship apparently has sailed. So anyways.
Well, the fact that you have an existing condition that's been there for years,
Yes,
and you're looking to decrease the encroachment,
correct.
it should be okay.
Yes, I would agree. And those are, I think those are the highlights of the comments. You know, I don't want to beat this to death in front of the commission. Will or Scott, is there anything else that you think?
No, I think you touched on everything. The other ones are mainly housekeeping and
Right.
technical.
And, well, I have some planting issues and some signage issues.
Hmm? Well, I think you're right. I think that's probably the last issue that we would like the full commission to adjudicate. You know, Will has rightly said, you know, let's do more landscaping,
Do
trees.
you have
things.
Will's
I do.
comments?
I
Do
do.
you care to run through them quickly?
Well, yeah, we can go through the one, we've gone through the circulation.
These are dated August 21st.
Yes. The applicant has requested the waiver of loading space. I think that's.
And what number is, all right,
That's
let's
number
back
8.
up. Number 6, we've already discussed. Number 7, blue tarps at the entrance.
Yeah, go ahead.
We will replace those with a permanent replacement tarp from what's there now. So the blue tarps are just a temporary fix. We would replace the existing cover so that it's a similar thing like we have on the detail tent.
Okay.
Number 8 is the loading space. You know, as John has said, you know, we 2 or 3, 4 trucks a month is pretty much all we get. So, you know, we'd like to ask for the waiver on that basis.
So that requires you to submit a letter requesting the waiver. Okay. And if just look at zoning 6.1.4, that addresses that. So, you know, make sure that your letter contains the appropriate information.
Number 8, I believe we have addressed. Number 10 gets into the landscape plan. First item, I think we've addressed. The second, reconcile the plan installation sizes consistent with the minimum sizes per zoning. I believe that has been addressed. I'm not sure if we're on different wavelengths as to
I think
whether
you're
the trees are
specifying
shade
caliber.
trees.
I think you're specifying caliber on your plans.
Yeah,
We don't use caliber we use DBA.
okay.
Yeah.
I thought I had, but, okay, fair
Just
enough.
check,
I will
check
check that.
again, check 6.2.2E12,
Yep.
and that'll tell you what size the plants need to be.
Yep. Yeah, no number 3, I thought I had addressed too, but this I think is
The comment is really a lot.
is common in staff. I think, if I have addressed it or Will has not seen it, I will get that done. Number 11 is additional plantings in the following locations, and that primarily is the issue of trees. Is that fair to say, Will, that the shade trees are the
Well,
kind of the...
trees, I mean,
Yep.
shade tree would be good, but more ornamentals would be all right.
Yeah, and that's kind of the, where we're at is for us to do shade trees, kind of and a car wash is.
Well, if you're going to reconfigure that island out at the street, can't we at least get a tree out there?
One tree, John?
Yeah, I just don't want it to block the sign. 70% of our traffic is spontaneous, people just
I
driving
understand,
by.
I can fully appreciate that, but I'm sure whoever is advising on your landscaping can pick out a species and a location so your sign will still be visible.
Something in the back.
No, out in the island,
Oh, out here.
yes.
Well, part of the septic is there too, so, I mean, maybe if you recapture some of that area, it could go right there.
Yeah, that was my thought. That island is going to be increased in size, so you can get something that's more central to the site and not obscure the signage.
That sign exists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you maintaining that other sign still?
the lollipop will go away.
Yeah, lollipop goes. Can I suggest something into the 3 to 4 foot range, something a little more extensive in height, not so much a shade tree, but leaves the site in visibility, but really beef up landscaping along
Well-
that entire line that may be...
Technically, you should have a street tree out there.
Yeah, I understand.
That's
I think I see where we're going.
kind of what the requirements are.
Yeah.
My only concern, we'll figure out the tree, but as far as doing extensive landscaping along 25, my concern is in the winter, when the plows go by. In 13 years, I've replaced my mailbox 6 times, that it's really hard to keep things growing there.
I'm just looking for a tree.
Yep.
But the the snowplow won't plow
Can we
down
please
on
get Bill a tree?
a tree,
We can.
a big one.
We can. Okay. Okay. Anything else, Will? You think that covers it?
Well, yeah, you have signage issues.
Okay.
Now, we don't have to resolve that right this minute. You can discuss that with Will or with Joe in the office, but you currently exceed what we allow for signage, and that's a pre-existing condition, but you can't exceed what you already have.
After I got Will's email, I went through and checked the calculations, and for my 2 double-sided signs, I only included one side of the sign in the calculations, and one of those, the lollipop that I referred to, we're getting rid of. So on a revised basis, with the proposed signage and getting rid of the banner, we're reducing our signage by 14.54 square feet.
But we're not counting the banner, right?
Right, I'm taking that out.
I know, but
Yeah,
you're not
so then
counting
we're
that.
reducing it by
Okay.
4.5 feet. So I've got copies of this.
And then there was a question about the grade where the handicap parking is. the grade between this property and the neighboring property.
Yep, again, I didn't want to run afoul of submitting new application to, or new materials to the board, but I'm gonna make,
Well, we might as well get it out, you
Yep.
know, on the record now.
okay. Page up. All right, so in the revised handicap parking space design, what I've done is the configuration is substantially the same, but what I've added is a concrete landing and what's the equivalent of a curb ramp in that location, just to make sure we got up to the door and so that the grades would work. And one of Scott's comments was to put a rail all the way around both sides of that, which I have on the current drawings. And last but not least on that was, in order to make the grade changes that I needed to make in here, I'm adding a strip of landscaping right in here. I've only got so much room between the property line and my minimum dimensions for building code. But it is enough that I can put a strip in there, fill it with topsoil, and get some ever-blooming daylilies in there. So we have added some landscape in there.
And nothing exceeds 2%.
Correct.
One of the things that I had recommended in this is, what I'm a little concerned about is, you got this island here which is very minimal. And there's traffic coming this way, and in the wintertime, when the daylilies are not there, and there's no one in the parking space, I'm a little concerned that, you know, it snows or whatever, someone's gonna hit this. So one of the things I had suggested was just a simple railing or fence line or something like that in the middle of it, just to delineate it, you know, in bad conditions. I don't know if
That's fine.
Well,
yeah.
Put reflectors up, too.
Yeah, I'm just saying, anything, reflectors, a railing, whatever they want to propose and whatever you guys accept. So I just thought I'd point that out. Yeah, well, what if it's not?
Not unless the board has any more questions.
Let's ask them. Start with you, Bruno.
And I always get to start, I love it. I actually have a couple questions. I am in 100% agreement with Will. In first looking at these plans, the first thought in my head was, you're getting a delivery coming in from your entrance, and I'm assuming, not knowing anything about the car wash business, I'm assuming you're getting bigger barrels of whatever soap and such that you guys use. And to see this truck trying to serpentine its way through this parking lot and then cross over, and first looking at it and then listening to Scott, I would absolutely love it if you guys made some sort of change like Will is suggesting, because I think I think that would make life easy and safe that way. The other question, the vacuums. They're only gonna be operational during your hours of operation, or are they gonna be operational 24 hours?
Yeah, no, they'll only be open when the site is on, and, you know, they'll be turned off when we're not there.
Okay. What's going on for lighting on the property?
There are no proposed changes from what we have currently.
The comment about sidewalks. I actually believe you do need one here. I do see a lot of people going across the street to the gas station, or going next door to the gas station. You see people going here and there. I guess across the street there's a restaurant of some sort, and you see people coming across that area quite often, even in other shopping centers. coming over, I think a sidewalk here would be pretty, would help, and would be, I think it should be something that we have you guys put in there. I also do think we should get Bill a tree. I'm a big fan of that.
Not Bill, the zoning commission.
Let's get the zoning commission a tree. 'Cause
How about to the town?
I think that would be really nice to have a tree there. And I'm glad you're gonna get rid of that lollipop sign, because she's ugly. But, those are my questions. So if you're not having these vacuums 24 hours, then that answers my questions about basically lighting and people coming in at that time. You know, the more and more I look at it and watching the flow of traffic through this area, and knowing that you guys do a great job and how busy you are, that you're gonna have a lot of people coming through this way, just a safety thing for me, would be to really reconfigure how you're gonna have this traffic come out. Especially you're saying some of these people are gonna get their car washed, and then they're gonna come back over here to get their car vacuumed. I don't know, that's just one of my concerns in looking at these plans.
Yeah, just with respect to the trucks coming, they generally come, or almost always come, before we actually open up. You know, the garbage man's there, you know, between 5 and 6 in the morning, and our deliveries come before 7:30. So that's that. As I said, we would be proposed to.
I totally understand that, but what if they don't come? What if they're running late?
Yeah. We would probably tell them to come back the next day, because they would interrupt the traffic flow here, that we can't afford to have a truck sort of sitting here for 15 minutes blocking somebody who's got their car is already vacuumed and they're ready to exit. We'll have to figure that out. But we did say that we would be prepared to modify this section here. With respect to the sidewalk, there aren't sidewalks coming to us, and there's an office building, sort of doctor's offices next to us, and then there's a stone sale place further to that, and then it's kind of swamp area.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would sort of have a sidewalk to nowhere. I appreciate that, our workers will, walk across in front of the liquor store to go to the gas station to get sodas and things like that. But I think, again, just my perspective, that this would be sort of an orphan sidewalk in the area, and, is it really justified? So I, leave that back to the rhetorical question.
I totally understand where you're coming from. I still feel it's justified. That's my opinion. That's how I feel about it. I see a lot of people with their bikes and kids walking, and you see that as much as you cringe at sometimes what's going on 25, how cars come up and down. I still feel a sidewalk. And again, if the Smithy across the street came in front of us, I would say the same thing to them. I feel that they should have a sidewalk as well. That's my feeling.
Anything else, Bruno?
I'm all set.
John?
All my concerns have been addressed. The signage, the new, what you're getting rid of, not having the banner, I think is good. That you had a reduction by 4.5 feet, you mentioned. As for the dumpster, what are we doing to shield the dumpster, as for some type of covering with plants or anything like that?
Yeah. It's threefold, actually. You can see the relocated dumpster down in this area. First is that it's surrounded by the white vinyl fence, first of all, and gated on a new concrete pad. And secondly, in the landscape plan, it's completely surrounded on 3 different sides by various plantings to screen it out.
That's all I have.
What do you think about the sidewalk?
I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. Kathy?
Okay, sidewalk, I do concur. I know it seems unfair to have a sidewalk going to nowhere.
Concur with who?
I confer that we should encourage sidewalk. Although it's a sidewalk to nowhere at this time, if the building next door to you, for whatever reason, gets, torn down, somebody else comes in, they'll have to put a sidewalk in. So their sidewalk will adjoin yours. We don't know how development will occur along Route 25, but this is the goal. I also agree, the landscaping is particularly up front by Main Street. I'm thinking, maybe even just dogwoods or something that would be low-growing, that would not interfere with sightlines and/or your sign. Will the new plan eliminate some parking spaces, and if so, does that impact, do you have more than enough spaces, you feel, so that by eliminating those couple of spaces, it won't matter?
Actually, in the long run, we're adding parking spaces.
Oh, well, then,
So,
okay.
Well, let's be clear, part of this proposal is defining a parking standard for this use, which part of your approval has to do. Now, we did sort of do that with the last one, so we're not reinventing the wheel in that regard, but let's be clear, this approval comes with a commission-defined parking standard for this use.
Okay. Can you tell me how many vacuum stations there will be? It's probably in here somewhere, and I probably just missed it.
7.
There will be 7.
Let's hope I got
And
that
they
right.
are always blue?
I think it's 8.
I think it's a,
Your plan has 8.
Okay,
Yeah, it's 8.
8. And they're always
Yes,
blue?
8. I stand corrected.
okay.
They're always blue.
They're blue.
And
Is
how
your
many?
question, can they be painted a different color?
Well, I'm not sure if I even want to know if they can be painted a different color. Just I'm questioning the color. Yeah, a different color would be nice, but, and how many are there now?
There are no existing,
No.
There are none.
there are no existing free vacuums.
Okay. I'm just a little concerned about the visibility of them, not just the color, but, coming from Route 25, driving by, they're not particularly beautiful. If I could design your plan, I would put them in the rear where somebody wouldn't see them, but obviously you have some constraints on the property. Signage. One thing that I don't see on this plan, okay, you're gonna keep the pole sign, which is, okay. I don't have an issue with that. You're gonna keep the
Yes,
pole sign.
that's the existing.
What I don't see is the number of your property,
The address.
your
Yeah.
address number.
Yeah, it's only on the mailbox.
Well, I have a real thing, I've been going a lot of places lately where I've been trying to find signs on buildings in towns that I'm not familiar with, and I believe our regulations call for it. There should be, on every building and every property in town should have a number.
Can you add a white vinyl to the upper corner of that sign? Because it's an internal illuminated sign, correct?
It was professionally made.
Yeah, I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
It's internally illuminated, correct?
Yes.
So there's a acrylic panel. I think if I saw that, it seems to be a dark area in the upper left corner or right corner. You could probably add a white vinyl numbers
Okay.
without it being much of a, I'm assuming your sign guy could
Okay.
do that.
Yeah,
very
I'll look
easily.
into that, yeah.
Or even underneath,
It has to be the top, Kathy.
it has to be the top, okay.
And
Whatever,
there's a minimum numeral
Okay.
size. It's in the
whatever it takes.
regulations.
I
think it's
would like to see that
4
there.
inches. Has to be at least 4 inches.
That'll have your 911.
And I think that's all for me right now. Thank you.
Leon?
Well, for everybody pretty much addressed what, I'm also into the sidewalk,
You what?
the sidewalk.
You,
Yes?
Sidewalk, yes. That's all I raised, because they hit on everything else.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did have another question. I'm sorry. In looking through the signage, I just wanted to be clear, we know where exit signs are gonna go and entrance signs, that's pretty obvious. But, and I know the banner sign's gonna go, But where are signs like this going to go? Are they going to be on the outside of the building, the rear of the building, on the side of the building?
The sign, that sign and the, I believe that's the detail sign,
Yes.
are currently along the river, so just in front, right here.
Okay.
And then the customer warning sign is back here.
And I understand you need the sign that says, "Well, keep your feet off the pedals and turn the wipers off and all that." And so, are these signs at the actual entrance to the car
Right,
wash?
right here, one is over the tunnel entrance, and then one is on the side, going from bottom to top.
Okay, and these are, when you add them all up, they still conform to the
Those
Yeah.
all exist.
sign?
Yeah.
Okay.
Existing.
I just want to make sure that they.
Yep.
Okay, that's it.
Ma'am, you're done.
I'm done.
Sorry.
I didn't have anything to add.
Sidewalk?
I'm not sold on having a sidewalk.
Okay. Paul?
I have a number of questions and comments. So how's the traffic flow? Someone could come in, go strictly through to the car wash, and then after they wash their car, they could drive around and get a vacuum, or they could just come in and use the vacuum, I assume, right?
Correct, they can, there's an entrance here, they can drive around, go through here, go into the vacuum, and then exit.
So if someone's coming around and then they come back down, there's a potential that they're gonna hit a dead end, basically, right? Because,
They should be able to flow straight through here to exit, and then if they've gotten their car washed, they can come around here, pull into a spot, vacuum their car, and then exit the wash.
well, I'm saying if they change their mind, or if all the spaces are full, all the vacuum spaces are full, or if they change their mind, they're now at a dead end, I guess. They
Well-
can't, because they can't, they're not gonna go back into the car wash, they can't take a left, they can't back, that might be a problem.
Yeah, they would come straight through here. We have people on the exit end who are towel drying the cars that would direct them to exit the property, and if they wanted to go through, all the spaces were used here, they would then go down 25 and then come back around.
Well, I'm just, saying, they would, if all the spaces were full, they would have to back up. They would have to literally
Right.
drive in
No
reverse.
worries.
Well, but the employees would pull them through and say, you can't stand here and wait because they're going to block traffic.
Okay.
I
I'm just saying,
understand.
there's no other way to,
I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I think, it could happen. But I think what John's trying to say is it's a full staff organization, so that he's got guys here, as cars are coming out, he's got guys in here. So as something develops, he's got staff that are around there to try and, help it out. I mean, they're not kind of left to their own devices.
okay, and the handicap space is, again, that's for potentially an employer, or,
It could be for an employee or a customer. We have a certain amount of parking spaces. We're required to provide one handicap space.
Yeah.
The handicap space has to be proximate.
I'm more
to the door.
questioning how you get there.
They can either come around in, come this way, and come in and park, or, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. They can come in the liquor store driveway and come in as well. But the clear, if they had to stay on our property, they would come in the entry, take this right, and come out.
Yeah, well, like, normally there's cars stacked there that are being dried, and it would be a problem getting into that space.
Yeah. Well, again, it's staffed, and if
Yeah.
somebody's trying to get someplace, they
I just see a lot of congestion there, and
Yeah.
I'm a regular customer, so I understand how this works, and that leads me to my final comment, and that's, about relocating that exit. I really think that's important, and not just because of the trucks. I think it's more of a safety issue. Like I said, I'm a regular customer, and I see what, now typically there's 2 cars being, dried out there, and now that potentially exit, now we're saying that potentially there's 3 cars that could be exiting there at the same time. And I see that as a safety issue, because there's times where they're competing to exit, it's like a car race, and the one car is blocking the sight line from the other car, and they're all trying to get out at the same time. So I see that as more of a problem, that's why I think it's important to shift that exit so that you don't have that happening at all. It's one car exiting at a time.
Yeah, that was my comment overall too. I mean,
Yeah.
Scott was just generated this at the beginning from the SU-30 truck radius and when I looked at that, I saw a bigger issue,
Yeah, I
which
think-
we
I think the
recognized
state would
before as
be-
well.
Yeah, we talked about that.
We recognized
way-
before.
way back.
I mean, the state would look favorable to that, I would
Yeah.
assume.
I mean-
I think it's very unsafe the way it
Yeah.
operates now. That's what
What do you think about sidewalk?
sidewalks, I guess, what do the regulations say? Is there something definitive about?
No.
The POCD, obviously is all recommendations and what sidewalks and your regulations reflect only as a discretionary item on your part, but the POCD does promote it.
Then I would say I would go for it. I would want it.
Michael?
We have been of late requiring sidewalks on all in the business district. So I agree with, Bruno started down there, 3 trees. I think that's a requirement also. Do you think about closing off access to the liquor store? Did your consultant mention?
Yeah, the owner of the liquor store is adamant that it remain open.
Okay, so it doesn't.
But you have no legal obligation to, correct?
No, but I use his well.
No, I get it. I get it.
Okay.
Yes, it's.
No, but he,
Which incidentally, the health department
Yeah.
is suggesting and recommending that you connect this to public water, especially with
Yeah.
the use that you have.
yeah, but that isn't the only reason. I mean, we don't really know. Certainly, I don't believe there's anything in our deed that gives him that right.
All right.
But as far as traffic pattern, we really don't know.
Well, the
I
cross
mean, the
access.
state may have
is-
something to do.
The cross access is actually positive, but it's only positive when your outer driveways provide, in and
Yeah,
out in
yeah.
a more efficient, safe way. Because the code requires, the POCD requires a joint access. I mean, that definitely is a positive.
Yeah. But once the district gets involved, it gets
Well, that's,
interesting.
Joint access for, I think in
Adjoining
general,
property.
for larger parking lots.
yeah, I mean,
This,
this
I think,
isn't
is more
really
of
it,
a,
but.
I think it's worse, it's, again, because of there's so much congestion.
No,
there.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
If you have to do that in tandem with your exit and
Yeah.
entrance and stuff.
That's it for me.
That ship is almost out of port.
So, I mean, what do we do with that?
Michael, anything else?
No.
Okay. They just brought up the connection to the public water, and I understand it's your intention to not connect it this time, right? The sidewalk that runs along the vacuum stations, is there a curb there?
Yes.
Now, your detail does not show a curb, but your site plan shows that, like, there might be a curb there, so.
It's,
And if there's not a curb, what's gonna prevent cars from driving over the sidewalk?
well, there definitely needs to be a curb there. Let me
So
put it
it's an
that way,
integral,
because,
an integral concrete curb?
yes, and I believe that is on the detail.
I believe
I don't
it's
know if we
not.
can zoom out enough to get to the next page.
I'm looking at the detail on sheet 5, it says concrete walk, and it does not show a curb. But you're saying that there is an integral curb on that sidewalk?
Yes, it is. And the reason, and I think what indicates it, even though it's not on the detail,
I see
is the
that,
spot elevations along here and the requirement that there be a curb there so that this drainage does make it down to that basin.
all right.
So that would be a drafting error. There does need to
So there's
be.
gonna be a 6-inch integral curb on that
Yes.
sidewalk, okay. We already talked about tree size, adding a tree to the front, revision of the front island and that entryway. Written request for the loading zone waiver, landscaping around the dumpster signage, blue tarps, grade at the handicap. I'd just like to throw in my 2 cents on the sidewalk out at the street. You know, our POCD is suggesting that all properties, as their improvements are being done, that they put in a sidewalk, with the ultimate goal that we have sidewalks everywhere. But the fact of the matter is, we have no sidewalks down there. As you already noted, you have one property adjacent to you, a small stone yard and a swamp. And directly to the south of you is a big paved parking lot with a small island between it and the street, so there's no room for a sidewalk there. I think, my personal opinion, due to the current economic conditions, I think it's a financial burden to request property owners to put in sidewalks unless there are other sidewalks that they're going to either connect to or are in close proximity, so that in the near future, there's the potential of there being a continuous sidewalk. So my opinion is, and this will be up to the commission as a whole to make the decision, but my opinion is that you should not be required to put in a sidewalk at this time. And that's all the comments that I have. I have to open up to the floor, see if anyone in the audience has a comment, and then we'll go back to you. So is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this application? Anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Any general questions or comments? Okay. Back to you, Mr. Swift.
You know, in closing, we certainly have some open issues. I just have to ask the stupid question: is this headed for being tabled tonight for next week?
Well, I think that we have, you know, if you're talking about making some modifications up here in the front, we'd like to see what you're proposing.
Right.
And if you can have that information prepared by next Wednesday, we can get this on the agenda for our next meeting, which is September 7th.
Very good.
Wednesday at 3, Jim.
I think, I think we would like to request the commission table the item till the next possible meeting. I think some of these things, we may actually want to take advantage of a conversation with the district to see the complexity of that and how that works out. We will make every effort for this September 7th, but we will be here on the September 7th either to proceed or ask for
Well, like I said, for September 7th, your information would have to be submitted by 3 p.m. on August 30th.
I understand.
Okay.
Will that give them time to get to the DOT?
Well, that's
What we don't know.
all right, then we'll continue this until the 7th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, 5 minutes break, please.
We'll take a 5-minute recess. It is now 9:27. Rolling. 9:35, we're back. Next up, item number 7. Planning and Zoning Commission, Monroe, Connecticut, notice of public hearing to be held August 24th, 2017, RAA 2017-08, file 991E, zoning text amendment, certificate of zoning compliance timing. Planning and Zoning Commission proposed zoning text amendment regarding time limits and time extensions related to certificates of zoning compliance within all residential and non-residential zoning districts. Complete details and copies of all related materials associated with the above matters are on file and available for viewing in the Monroe Planning and Zoning Department offices. Exhibits, Will?
Exhibit 1, draft zoning regulation text amendment as proposed by the commission. Exhibit 2, referral notice to Commissioner of Public Health and the Aquarium Water Company. Exhibit 3, notice referral to the regional planning agencies. Exhibit 4, referral notice to adjacent municipalities. Exhibit 5, Westcog response to referral, no impact, regional impact. Exhibit 6, fire marshal comments. Exhibit 7, town engineer comments. Exhibit 8, building official comments. Exhibit 9, Naugatuck Valley COG response referral, somewhere no response, no regional impact. Exhibit 10, Metro COG draft response referral, no regional impact. Also in, yeah, that's it. The amendments consist of 6 different amendments. There's some of them which are related. These are all, as mentioned earlier, proposed by you as a commission, and I can go through each one. The first amendment, amendment number 1, would be amending existing section 7.4.2C. What these amendments would do is they're really clarifications to the current law, the regulations. They don't change anything in a substantive way that the current regulations don't already say. They just say it much better and much clearer. And it really, what it's doing differently is it's being more specific as to what your policy is. That's what your regulations do, in a sense, to state the policies, and what dictate to staff what staff can do and what staff can't do. The current process, staff has been working with applicants and having a process where there may be a temporary type CO issued and a bond situation, which the code allows. The reality is that's really the responsibility of the commission. That is the way the code presently reads. This would specifically be very clear about that. So it's making that clarification in a sense. Basically what it's saying is that if a property has an approval, it's being developed, they're close to the end, but there's some things they aren't finished with, if they want to change what's in your approvals, which say you have to be complete in order to occupy and use your premises, they would have to come to this commission and ask for that modification relative to the approval. And you know, sometimes it does come up and there's a legitimate reason. For instance, we may be in November or December, they're finishing the building, and the final course of pavement can't be done because the plants are closed, or because, you know, that's not an appropriate time. January, February is not an appropriate time to be planting landscaping. But you know, if it progressed so far and we're in that season, well, you know, that's a legitimate, perhaps, reason to grant that temporary type situation, and then in the spring, complete the plan. But those are things that you would have to determine on a case-by-case basis. The balance of the Amendment 2, Amendment 3, Amendment 4, and Amendment 6, if I jump over 5 for a second, what those are doing, they're codifying what already is the practice in your approvals. So we're making the code consistent with your approvals. Back in, I don't know when exactly it was that the 90-day was established, Somewhere along the line, the commission changed that to 180 days because 90 days was too short. It got changed to 180 days. So we're codifying sort of what we're already doing as a practice. The other, with regards to the 45 days, again, we're codifying what's already in your approvals, and we're making it consistent between your approvals and the code's catching up with that, if you will. I skipped over Amendment 5, but Amendment 5 is basically parroting Exhibit number 1. You know, you have two instances. You have Section 7 is part of Article 7. Article 7 is site development plan approval. Article 8 deals with special exception permits. So in both cases, site plan, special exception permit, the issue of the CO would be covered by the reference in Exhibit 5. It's the same, making the same language, but it's the two different permit types.
So, Will, when I was reviewing this again last night,
Yep.
Something came to mind that I wanted to address or ask about. In Amendment 3 and Amendment 6, where it's saying requests for extensions must be submitted a minimum of 45 days prior to the expiration date. We have a situation where someone calls for a certificate of zoning compliance in the process of getting a certificate of occupancy. And when the inspector goes out for the final inspection, let's say they find 2 or 3 things, minor things that are not completed to the satisfaction of the requirements. If the applicant wants to request a temporary, does that mean they have to wait 45 days from that point?
Well, in that point, they're not asking for an extension. In theory, they could have 4 years left on their permit. You know, you're building from the time of approval to the time you get your CO, you have a 5-year period. So unless they're in the last 2 months of that 5 years, they could have months and years to go at the time that they're done.
My concern is if someone in the 11th hour has a few minor things that for some reason they cannot complete.
Right.
I would like to see them get in at the next meeting to request the commission granted a temporary certificate of zoning compliance.
They typically get on as pretty much, whenever people ask for extensions, they pretty much get on the next meeting. That's how we've been operating it.
So the 45 days is what's...
The time it's going to expire, we don't want you to tell us at the last minute. We want you to tell us beforehand that you need an extension. And again, when you have a 5-year period, the only time that 45 days would be an issue to your expiration is the expiration date, which would be
4 years and 10 months.
which would not probably be for 90% of the time, if not bigger percentage, in the situation that you're talking about for the CO. Because if someone, I mean, most things don't take 5 years, maybe in Monroe, 5 years to build. You know, you get your approval, you get your building permit, you start constructing. You know, a big project would take maybe 2 years. You still have another 3 years.
So in the scenario that I just verbalized, they could come in and get it to the next meeting.
Yes, and that's typically what we, for the most part, do. We put those on as soon as they come, for the most part. And the majority of the extension requests we get are actually for the signing of the plans, not for the construction end of it. You'll get the other ones infrequently because it's a 5-year window. The last one you had was at the last meeting. We probably hadn't had one of those for almost 8 months or 6 months. Most of them are for really you have an approval, you have that 180-day window to get
your plan's all signed, those typically ask for some more extensions. Those are the majority of the extensions.
Those extensions, I'm not
Yeah.
worried about. It's the request for a temporary certificate.
Well, that's not an extension. So they could come in, get their approval,
So we
get
don't
their
have,
building
we don't have
permit.
any time requirement.
No, there's a 5-year window. So the only time that would come in play is the last 2 months of their 5-year window. So if someone's spent 5 years building it and they're down to the last 2 months, that would be an issue. Now, again, you don't necessarily deny them because they haven't done it, or we don't put them on because they didn't do it in the 45 days. I mean, this is sort of to keep things flowing.
So that is more related to the extension of an approval.
Yeah,
It's not
not
for
the
the
CO.
granting of a temporary
No,
CO.
no, no, because this is what I would think would come into play. Somebody's building their project diligently, they get to a point where they're almost done, and there's some feature that they're not done with, and there's a reason why they can't do it, but they want to open. So they would come to you and ask for, to allow them to basically operate. You know, modify your approval, it says you got to finish to operate. So you're going to let them operate without them doing X, Y, and Z, and you might put them on a timeline as to when they have to finish X, Y, and Z in order to get that temporary opening. So you may give them 60-day window, 90-day window, whatever, spring, June 1st, whatever. They're probably still in their whole 5-year window, and that's not ever affecting them. Now, what comes at the tail end then is if they don't meet whatever time you gave them to do it. So again, it's not an extension. You're really modifying the requirement that they had the CO before they operate. Finish before you get.
Right,
No
okay.
ticking, no laundry.
And may I ask a question, in that instance, so for whatever reason, the final landscape, you know, the particular species of whatever they're gonna plant couldn't be delivered, and so it'll be delayed, and we give them this temporary, certificate, what happens if, in fact, whatever that final thing is that hasn't been done, isn't completed? Can we close them down? Do we find them? What recourse do
Well,
we have
in there
under that
lies
circumstance?
the whole slippery slope of temporary COs and whatnot, is that, you know, the whole idea is you get an approval,
Finish your
you
work.
get a permit, you build what you got approval for, then you get to use it. When you let somebody in earlier, and there are circumstances where it's very legitimate, and, you know, and there's people who do the right thing, it's the bad apples that mess that all up, and they, you know, they don't do it, they don't meet your, say you give them 60 days or spring, and they don't do it, and then you're chasing them again, and you're chasing them again, and they're operating, but they're not done with what they said they were going to do, and what they were approved to do. So, you know, it is a slippery slope. I mean,
But is there a recourse? Is there any kind of?
well, yeah, I mean, at some point, you know, you give them more rope, give them more opportunities to comply. At some point, you have to say, well, we gave you 3 opportunities, we gave you 90 days, we gave you 180 days.
Enough.
You know, then it could be, it is a zoning violation if they're not complete, or you can pull it. But, you know, we don't want to do that either. I mean, that's not, you know, we want them to open, but we want them to finish too.
Okay, I don't know if I cut you off before you were finished.
No, I'm fine.
All right, why don't we see if anyone else has questions? We'll start with Michael.
I don't have any.
Wow. Harsh. Curveball.
No, it's just clarification on the 45 days again. I don't know if you answered it. So if someone, if it is a last minute thing, how do you know, sometimes that might happen. How do you deny it?
No, not necessarily. Again, the point of having some structure is, you know, we have to operate, you know, we have multiple applicants,
Yeah.
we have multiple things on the agenda. We do try to accommodate as much as possible to get on the next agenda with those kinds of requests, because they're, you know, they're a few minute things with you. They're not a long thing. But, you know, sometimes the agenda is really big. And we may put them on, you may not get to it because it gets to 11 o'clock.
So the intent
But
is
we may
45
not
days.
put it on because there's just too much on there. And if this, and we don't want someone coming in the day before the meeting,
Okay.
you know?
Yep, understood.
So
Okay.
Nothing? Nope. Leon?
Yeah, I got questions about just, you say the commission may require a public hearing.
which one?
Like, I keep looking back and everything says in here, a request for extension,
Yeah, for an extension.
right? Even for us to give them a temporary CO?
No, that is not about the CO. This is, I'll give you the example, that was here the last meeting, the Cottage Street subdivision. That was 5 years old, then 4 years more from the Public Act, that, you know, when the recession, dealing with economic downturn, the state added 4 more years, that's 9. Now they're asking for 5 more. That's a lot of years from the time that subdivision was approved. Things might have changed. Circumstances are different. Laws have changed. So when someone comes in with an application, you have the opportunity to put out a public hearing relative to the request for that extension of time. You're not required to do it, but it gives you the ability based on a case-by-case basis, should you need it. And again, that's what your approvals all have been saying, at least as long as I've been here.
So it's not saying that we will do a public hearing, we say we can if we deem it necessary. That has nothing to do with a temporary CO.
Yeah, that has to do again with,
That's
got an
extended.
approved project, they have a 5-year window to
No, no, I
complete,
know, that's-
and that's the extension they're asking for. They're asking for the second 5 years.
But but like you're saying, because it's in here, we could ask for that, is what you're saying, right?
And your approvals say that now as well.
I don't think that we should, you know, on a temporary CO, should have a public hearing.
Again, it's not related to the temporary CO issue. This is a different amendment, a different different section. The section 7.5.2 extensions, B, is not talking anything to do with COs.
And so, the other thing is, so this only has to do with approvals that we granted, right?
Absolutely.
Has nothing to do with the building department.
Nope. This is, you granted a special exception permit, you granted a site development plan, you granted a not a subdivision. You granted a site development plan, you know, for instance, on the car wash. Let's say you approved the car wash. If you approved the car wash today, the car wash would have 5 years to complete the improvements, based on state statutes. They also have the ability to request of you an extension of an additional 5 years, should they need it. That's what this is about. So when they ask for that extension, you have the ability to hold a public hearing, should you deem that necessary or appropriate, because either things are stale, things have changed, you know, environment changed, your code changed. And again, I will remind you that this is what's in your approvals present.
No, I understand why we're going to do this in the commission, in some ways. But the public hearing part, or what we can require a public hearing, I mean, if somebody comes in and they need an extension because they have a bond set, we know they have a bond set, and they didn't get the driveway in, or.
Again, that's not what this is about.
That's not
That's not what this is
related to
about.
that. That's just related, when we grant someone a special exception permit, they have 5 years. If they, for whatever reason, decide they're not gonna do that project yet, they can request an extension.
Right.
We're saying that 45 days before the end of that 5-year period, they have to request the extension. It's not related to COs, it's only related to approvals.
I'll give you a different example. If they have 3 days left of the 10 years that you got, they got 5 years, they got a 5-year extension, and they got 3 days, there isn't anything you can do. Technically, 3 days will come, under statute, their project is done. I don't know what we do with those projects, but.
I got that, that has nothing to do with that, that's what I'm saying,
Right.
but I mean, so why couldn't this just be all separate from itself then? Just-
What?
Why couldn't we just do like a separate, because we incorporated all in the same thing.
Well, they're
Why can't we
incorporated
just do
under
it?
the same legislative bill, for lack of a better term.
Right.
And that's why they are separated by Amendment 1, Amendment 2, Amendment 3. They're unrelated to each other in that regard, but it's legislation that you're proposing to pass. So we could have done it as two separate things, notice 2 separate public hearings, which would have cost us twice as much. And, you know, we could have done it that way, but we're just trying to more efficiently adopt the legislation through one bill, if you will. I mean, what I can do in the future when we write these things, I can write them as Amendment A
Right.
and put all the related things in A, and do Amendment B and write all the related things in B. I mean, in the end, it's the same thing, but if it's clearer to you, in that sense, I can do it that way. That's just formatting, but.
So Leon, do you have any questions?
Well, no, that's, I just like, because you know, when you read B there, it says that this, you know, as standards set forth in 7.42 of these regulations. I think that it puts it with everything.
No, what I said earlier is that the two that go together, so if I did that A and B like I just suggested to you.
Right.
Amendment number 1 and amendment number 5 would be A, and all the other ones would be B. What B, 8.1.7B is doing, it's basically referring you to the language that's in Amendment 1. So we don't, the other way to do it is we repeat all that language in Article 8, and that just seems like extra paper in the code. And it's better to have it all stated in one place, because if you change it in one place and you don't change it in the other, now you have a conflict in procedure. So it's all stated in Amendment 1, and the other section, the special exception permit section, refers back to, and we have that in many places in the code, where it refers to it, so we have it in one place, not 2 places.
Oh. So what you're saying, we can't just make this its own separate thing, is basically.
Well, I'm not sure I understand.
Well, I mean, because what we're really doing is, we're letting somebody get a temporary CR. And that's something that we have to consider, that if all the other things are in place, and it's just because they couldn't get the plantings in, or they couldn't do this, or they couldn't do that. Basically, what's, you know, sometimes the staff makes, and we're gonna make that decision. I don't understand why we just can't have that as a separate piece and not incorporate it in all one piece.
Well, it's a separate amendment
Right,
in this application.
okay.
Well, a couple of points. Technically, as I said at the beginning, the current regulations, zoning regulations, already really say that you have to have a certificate of occupancy or zoning certificate of compliance in order to operate. This is saying the same thing. It's just clarifying that to modify that, you have to come to the commission. Technically, under the current code, that is already true. Staff historically has been doing it differently. The regulations don't authorize staff, technically, to do that. This is being more specific, that it's to be done by the commission, even though that's already what the code says. So it's basically saying, staff, you're no longer gonna do it that way, that the code doesn't authorize you anyway, it's gonna come to the commission. And as far as standalone, Leon, it is standalone, because you have one body, you have the regulations. We're amending certain specific aspects of the regulations to achieve those goals. So they are independent changes to the code. And I get it that it seems like, well, it's under one thing, it looks like it's all related. They are related in the sense that they're procedural. So, but again, if you were to break it down into the subject matters, 1 and 5 is one thing, and the rest are another thing, related thing.
So, okay, say if we give the extension. We say, okay, we give a temporary CO.
All right,
Now what happens if
that's a
it's,
little confusing. That's not an extension.
well, no, say it's temporary CO.
Right, so
not
you,
an
so
extension.
someone
All I'm
comes to
giving
you,
is-
right, someone
that's what
comes
I'm
to
saying,
you,
Okay,
We're
and you give,
granting-
we're granting you
We're
a
granting.
right, so
temporary
they're
opening.
almost done, they have A and B to do.
Right,
And they can't do A and B because of this and this. You concur with that, you say, fine. We're gonna modify our approval to allow you to operate till, let's say, June 1st, because you couldn't pave because it's February. Let's say that's what it is, to June 1st. That's what they'd be asking, that's what you would be granting. That would have, that relates, is not related to anything to do with their expiration or the timing.
right. And
Unless
then-
that happens to
okay.
coincide with that period.
And so, and what happens if that don't happen?
What happens if they then don't meet your grant of June 1st?
Yeah,
Same as if they operate without getting a certificate of zoning compliance. They're in violation of their approval.
and then how do we handle that?
The same as you would any other way. One, they
Becomes
could,
a
Well, that's
zoning-
why we have a
It becomes a
bond,
zoning
right?
enforcement.
no, that is not why we have a bond.
We don't have a bond?
Performance.
Bonds are for site stabilization, unless they're public improvements such as street improvements, then they would be performance bonds. They're not performance bonds. I mean, if someone
So
doesn't
then
complete his site plan,
basically-
we don't do it for them.
Basically, if it's not done in that time, they have to come back in front of us again and get another temporary CO for some reason. And that's-
Well, okay, let's say he hasn't get it done, and he legitimately couldn't get it done by the deadline you gave him. You know, before that deadline, he should be coming back to you and saying, look, I tried, but I couldn't. And then you could extend that again. You could give him another deadline. If he just ignores you, well,
So basically.
you can take
if
that for
it's
what that means.
So, let me just, like I said, I think this should be a separate thing anyway, I can tell you the truth, but
When you say separate,
I think that it should be not all incorporated in this, that, you know.
I
it
think
should
he's
be-
asking for a little more clarification
Well,
on the two
No,
different
it's a
issues.
separate amendment.
All right,
There are
so-
6 separate amendments here. They're kind of related, but they're all separate amendments.
Well, what I was gonna get at is that we can require a public hearing, I mean, we can get really deep in.
That is not related to someone coming in and asking you for, I want to operate, but I'm not done building everything. There's nothing about opening the public hearing for that.
All right, so this doesn't require a public hearing.
No.
When
Doesn't
when
say
someone's
that, but
asking
I'm
for
saying-
relief about their CO,
No,
no.
no, I understand well what you're saying, but
Discretion
it
is
just
what it-
doesn't say that here, you know what I mean? It just doesn't say that.
What do you mean?
Well, it's all incorporated in the same thing, you know what I mean? It's all.
No, it's
I
not.
understand-
No,
well,
it's
yeah, I
not.
understand you have the separate amendment.
The
but it says
CO
it
issues are
refers back
covered
to-
in section 7.42.
Right,
The time extensions are in section 7.52. They're separate sections. They're dealing with 2 different subject matters. The reference to the public hearing is in reference to the extension. It is not in reference to any relief for when they get a CO.
think
All right.
perhaps if you had the zoning regulations in front of you now, you might see the separation a little bit easier. The fact that they're on the same piece of paper, might be what's confusing.
Okay. That's all I have to say.
Kathy?
I just have one quick question. On the CO, do you see where there could possibly be a situation where staff might want to grant that temporary CO instead of having it come to the commission? I know this is saying that we get to do that, but could there possibly be a situation where?
That's not for me to determine, that's for you to determine. It's your regulations, it's your town, how you want that to go. I mean, as I said, technically, under the current regulation, without any of these amendments, that actually is,
I know.
the process is, if they want relief, they gotta go to you. The staff has been doing it historically.
I'm just wondering if.
Whether that's right or wrong, it's up to you to
I'm just
decide.
wondering if we're opening a can of worms or closing a can of worms. I don't have an opinion necessarily one way or the other, I'm just raising the question.
Any other questions, Kathy?
No.
Jonathan?
I would ask the commission for more time to consider the proposed changes in the regulation. I had not received a printed copy of this in my materials, and I'd like more time to consider its implications.
Well, this.
You've been given this
We
twice,
received this a
actually.
month ago.
I did not get a copy of it, but I'm just asking the commission for a little more time to consider the implications of this.
I would also remind you, Jonathan, at the time of, when you set the public hearing, you had this, because you had it in order to set the public hearing. I don't know if you were here at that meeting, but, so this is, and actually, I believe we actually sent it to you twice since the scheduling the public hearing. I don't doubt you didn't get it,
Anything else, Jonathan?
Nope.
Bruno?
Last but not least.
I understand actually both ends. I understand Bill's end where you say, wow, 45 days and I only have X, Y, and Z to do. And Bill, I
No, that's,
understand.
no. The 45 days is not related to a temporary
Okay,
CO.
Right. I'm sorry. But the 45 days prior to your extension, right?
That's for the,
Yeah.
for the,
That's,
you have a 5-year window.
Correct,
If you want to extend that,
correct.
at least 45 days before the end of the 5 years,
Correct.
you have to request an extension.
Correct. And I understand your point, what you were talking about before, and I also understand what Bill says with 45 days just to keep things going smooth and so on and so forth. I think if you're gonna put it at 45 days, I think you should hold them to it. That would just be my feeling. If you have an open spot to put them in and grant it sooner, sure, whatever, it's fine by me, but sometimes it makes life a little bit easier if you say 45 days, you go back or whatever your timeline is.
Most of the time, when people are coming in for these kinds of extensions, they're coming in, several months in advance, because
Fine.
they know that they're not going to be, doing the project. Most of them are projects that have not even started
Okay.
in that 5-year period. So they're coming in and requesting an extension that legally they're
Sure.
entitled to. We're just saying, we don't want them waiting till the last minute.
And I agree with that.
Anything else?
I'm all set.
All right, well, let's see what anyone in the public has to say. Anyone who would like to speak in favor of this application? Anyone who is opposed to this application? Mr. O'Hara?
Mr. Chairman, can I borrow the file? Just
The file?
Yes. I'm borrowing it because Pat O'Hara, 282 Shelton Road. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not totally against it, but I figured I'll go in this zone. I stopped up to Town Hall to see the file. Obviously, the text amendments in the file, all the other duty-bound pieces are in the file. But there were things that were missing in the file that concerned me. None of your meeting minutes from your subcommittee sessions were in here. None of the town planner's comments were in here. I have a general concern, and I'm going to throw in building permits while it may or may not be relevant to this. Certificates of occupancy, certificates of zoning compliance, building permits. I actually think the town as an entity should go through that whole process and get it cleaned up and figure out what they do and don't want to do, where you do and don't want to have building permits as part of your approval letters, what is a zoning compliance, what is a certificate of zoning compliance. There's no town attorney review of this that I see in the file. I understand what staff is saying, and I think, yeah, you want to have these things more definitive. This 7.5.2, I know when I was on the commission with you folks, we struggled a lot with this 45-day thing. The only concern I have here is the final sentence that says, in considering any such request, the commission may require a public hearing. What is the threshold for you to require a public hearing? Because we recently had a very large project which, first of all, there was legal challenges, which I know, or I think, includes a stay of whatever's going on. That may or may not be something you want to have in the regulations. But then the applicant continued to come back to us for extension after extension after extension. Be that, there is a 10-year window. 10 years from now, none of you people might be here. So what happens when the commission is turned over on a project that was controversial in the first place that then gets extended, and a number of commissioners are new to the commission, and they're like, we don't really like this project, we want a public hearing. What's the threshold? So now an applicant who got an approval 6 or 7 years ago is looking at an entirely new commission. What is your rationale for a new public hearing? You may want to have that as a part of this regulation, because if the commission just arbitrarily and capriciously calls for a new public hearing, that could be an issue. And lastly, my basic objection to this is, when I spent time on the commission, I wanted to see staff be able to do more things for the commission, not less things. A business being able to change based on site conditions as it's being built, change shrubs, change parking, move parking, all of those things that happen based upon what's going on a site. Do you folks really want to be involved in all of that? You have...
That's not related to this application.
Well, what's the First Amendment?
Granting a temporary, well, actually what it's saying is you have to have a certificate of occupancy and a certificate of zoning compliance to get your certificate of occupancy. You have to finish the job.
Right, and didn't it say changes would come back to the commission,
Yes.
and that staff right now is
Not
dealing with changes?
Not changes per se. It,
C3? What's,
Amendment 1C3.
incomplete improvements.
can somebody change it on the screen? Is it? Never been on this side of it.
What was it?
C3, all approved improvements, that's what's on the plan, shall be in accordance with the commission's approval, unless incomplete improvements are covered by a performance bond, assuring completion within 6 months. So what this is saying is that the commission can grant a conditional certificate of zoning compliance, and what they should be getting with that is a performance bond to complete the things that they aren't completed on the approved plan. It's not about changes to the project.
It's not about construction modifications. This is about incomplete improvements and trying to finish a project.
It actually provides another option.
It provides the option of a performance bond, which is sensible, which
Yeah.
has been discussed in
But
the past.
this is not related to construction modifications during the process.
Not having had an opportunity to read town planner's comments, which is one of the things I brought up, I'm a little behind you folks. My concern essentially was hearing staff say, we're doing things right now that we're trying to get into a regulation that has more description to it. I'm hearing confusion. I'm not seeing any legal review. Some of these things might want to have a lawyer looking at them. I'm not a lawyer. So that's my comment for the record.
Thank you, Mr. O'Hara. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in opposition? Any general questions or comments? Plain and safe, huh?
Of course. For the record, my name's Kevin Soley, 16 Crown View Drive in Monroe. I'm also a licensed professional engineer in Connecticut with Soley Engineering offices here in Monroe. I'm here to talk both on the professional side as a land use consultant and also on the personal side as a resident. So I'm going to talk about amendments 3 and 6 first regarding the 45-day for extension. I think establishing so zoning regulations are very important in the precise language that it says and how it reads. Because from a legal standpoint, if things aren't followed in strict conformance with what the regulations say, it's open to legal challenge. And there are a number of cases of projects in this town that have been appealed and tied up in court for frivolous reasons, for real reasons, but the risk exists. And my concern about Amendment 3 regarding the request for extensions to perfect the SEP plans, that results in a number of issues because for one, as Mr. O'Hara stated, we were part of a project, the Walmart project, and in that approval letter, it had a language in there that said any request for extension had to be placed in 45 days in advance of when the expiration is. What that resulted in is, this commission may remember, whoever was on it, every 45 days, you guys got a letter saying we need to request an extension. That's because we had a DEP permit, which took almost 2 years to get, we had encroachment permits to get. There were all these things that required an extensive amount of time. And instead of the commission being able to say, okay, let's do it, let's look at it once, we have to keep doing it every 45 days. Now, staff has been good, the commission has been good in looking at longer term extensions, but the problem is that 45-day window presents some problems because if a project like that, if we requested an extension at 44 days, all of a sudden we could now be subject to a lawsuit by not only the commission but also an applicant, which could result in a number of problems, a litany of problems. For example, the commission recently approved a project for a hotel at 387 Main Street, and in that approval, the commission actually allowed for 180 days to complete the perfection of those plans. And in that approval language, I want to read for the commission exactly what it says. It says, prior to the authorization of endorsement of the final plan sets, the following shall be completed within 180 days of the date of this approval, unless a written request for an extension is submitted by the applicant prior thereto. In parentheses, the commission shall consider said request at its next available meeting, which may be past the date of expiration, close parentheses, or this approval shall become null and void without further notice. So what that means is the commission in this approval letter, which actually is consistent with most approval letters, provides that an applicant say if we get to the end of a project and we don't have our approval or our plans perfected for whatever reason, we may be waiting for the DOT for something or the Department of Public Health for a permit or a right-of-way discrepancy with Brook Street. There are a number of things that could possibly come into play here. If the commission adopts a regulation that says you have to be within 45 days and we miss that 45 days, we're now opening up a problem in that the project at 387 Main Street is now the subject to 3 lawsuits. The commission is a party to that, the applicant's a party or the commission's a party to 2 of them, the applicant's a party to 2, and now a 3rd frivolous lawsuit. And all those lawsuits were made because they're trying to extort money out of the applicant. And if all of a sudden this regulation is adopted and there's a 45-day window, if someone submits a request at day 44, now there's another reason they can be sued. And the problem is, with language like this, as specific as it is, that suit could result in the entire application being thrown out and the entire project being thrown out. There's been instances where projects have lapsed for whatever reason, and it may be a lack of focus or a lack of attention to detail to know that we need to make the request in a timely manner. Not we, it hasn't happened to me, but it's happened to the commission. The last thing the commission wants to do is have to receive an application that they've already reviewed, that's already gone through several rounds of staff comments, it's already been received an approval, to then go through that same process again. It's a waste of everyone's time. And how the current approvals are written, what it does is it gives flexibility where if, let's say our permit expires tomorrow, and your next hearing isn't until the first week of September, we could still submit a letter tomorrow at the date of expiration requesting an extension, and the commission could still grant that extension at their next meeting, even though it's past the last date of extension. That's how your approvals are written now. I think that's good because it gives applicants flexibility, it gives the commission flexibility, and it's a paramount component of what happens, because the last thing the commission wants to do is have to rehear applications a second time. The 45-day is just, it's cumbersome and it's harmful to business owners and applicants, and it creates a little bit of a burden. And I think that component also comes into play regarding the extension to complete project improvements. Now, we talked about a situation where we get an approval, you have 5 years to do that project, right? It makes a lot of sense, you know, we can request an extension at any time. And typically, Will's right, it doesn't take 5 years to complete a project. However, there are a number of projects that this commission's approved that haven't started for whatever reason. It could be market driven, it could be, you know, financially tied, or there are all kinds of reasons. For example, Bill's Drive-In has an approval to add a drive-through, right? It was approved a couple of years ago. We have a couple of years left before that permit expires. But let's say they decide to start construction in year 3.5. And they're working along and they're expecting to make it by the end of that 5-year. And at 30 days before that 5-year is up, there's a fire at the nursery and they can't get the last trees to plant, or something happens. And now you're in a situation where if they don't make that request 45 days, because at day 45 everything looked great, at day 44 something bad happened. So now you're in a situation where the commission can't even possibly consider giving an extension because it doesn't meet the technical language that's written in the regs. I think that creates it just creates a situation that becomes a little bit onerous, a little bit too restrictive, and I think it kind of makes it a lot harder for people to look at, you know, to make a decision. I want to go invest in a community that's going to be flexible to work with us and to work, you know, to do that. And I think some of these things become a little bit more onerous, and I think it's a little bit problematic. I certainly think that it's reasonable to require requests for extensions and things like that, but I think putting timeframes on it, especially 45 days, is a little bit problematic. So that was Amendment 3 and Amendment 6. Amendment 2, I think that's great. It's something you're already adopting. You're putting 180-day windows on your permits now. Amendment 5, it is what it is, but I do want to talk about Amendment 1. So one of the things that happens is I do a lot of projects in town. I also do a lot of projects in other municipalities. And unfortunately, there is a perception that Monroe is a difficult community to do business in. And sometimes it's because it's too rigid. There are a lot of hoops people may have to jump through to kind of get an approval in this town. I think a lot of that's, you know, some of it's unfounded. There may be some truth to it, to other aspects of it. But what's important is that I think it's important that you empower staff to be able to work with applicants to find a way to get things done. And when you put regulations like this in place, it becomes somewhat counterproductive to that, because it basically tells staff you're not allowed to do anything. You're not allowed to work with an applicant to say, okay, and Will pointed out there are a lot of situations where this has happened, where it's February and Mondial can't do their finished surface course and they can't get the landscaping, but the building's ready to be used and they want to start employing people in Monroe. They want to start servicing their customers out of that building. So it makes sense to be able to work with staff to say, okay, you know what, everything else is good, you know, you can operate it temporarily as long as you get the landscaping in a certain period of time. And I certainly understand that you need to be protective of those bad apples where somebody may have gotten an approval and they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and somehow a temporary CO or something was granted, and then you're chasing them down. But the concern is we shouldn't let a few bad apples poison the entire well. When if you look at, in the grand scheme of things, when we have businesses come into this town, making investments in our community, and this is more as the resident side, you want to be as flexible with them as possible because commercial tax base is important and it's critical to everybody, especially when we're dealing with what we're dealing with Hartford and the funding for Monroe. I think it's critical that we actually try to empower our staff to work with applicants to make some of this stuff work. And I think when you're talking about, there's an ability to grant temporary COs. There's ability to use certain things. A lot of large format retailers, they may be able to finish the building. Life, health, and safety things are finished, and they want to start racking and stacking and merchandising so that when everything's done on the outside and all the site improvements are finished, they can open the doors and they can have people shopping there. They can have people working there. They can have all that happen in a timely manner. When you create a provision like this that is a little bit cumbersome, you're now forcing them potentially to wait until everything's finished, and then you can start merchandising. So you push that grand opening back by 45 days or whatever it takes. Whatever it is. I think it's important that the commission empower staff because I do think that there are things that are critical for you to review. I think substantive changes the commission needs to see. I think, something that's a controversial request. If somebody comes to you and says, I want to open, but I don't have my, my driveway isn't finished, yeah, I don't think staff should sign off on that. I don't think you should sign off on that. If it's something that's a little bit, gray area, maybe it's something that's worthy of discussion with the commission, but I don't think you should mandate that everything has to come back to the commission. I think maybe you should figure out a way to set up some graduated scale so that you empower the staff to a certain degree to be able to make some decisions, but at a certain threshold it has to come to the commission. I just think there's probably a way to better massage it so that it doesn't seem so strict and onerous, because my concern is that if the commission adopts language like this and someone comes to staff and says, oh, well, we're really, really close and we need this, they're going to say, can't do it. Can't deal with it, you got to go to the commission. And then what happens if the commission's schedule is out 3 weeks or something happens, you have to reschedule a meeting, and now we're dealing with somebody who is unable to do something, whether it's meet a lender's requirement or close on a bank loan or all these different things that do come into play. There was an instance where there's a project where they needed to get something finished and they needed to get a CO, or the bank wasn't going to close and it was the end of the year, and they were able to work with staff to get that accomplished so they could close the loan. They could still do what they had to do. They still had to make certain improvements, and and it may still even be going on, but there's at least a way to give some empowerment to the staff when the commission schedules don't necessarily jive with what has to happen. That's the only concern, is that when you adopt language like this and it's very rigid, there's no flexibility, you're then creating situations that may have unforeseen consequences that I don't think the commission wants to create. I think Kathy Lynchwood, you asked the question, what are the unforeseen circumstances that may be coming out of this? I think they do exist. I think there are chances where this could open a can of worms, not close the can of worms, or however you want to say it. I just think it's important that you want to maintain some flexibility. You want to empower staff to be able to make some decisions, to work with applicants, to figure things out. If it is tied to closing a loan, there's another client who was supposed to close on his bank loan. It didn't happen because everything wasn't set. That's fine. But now it got pushed out 2 months because of whatever the bank schedule was, and now he's maybe subject to an interest rate change, which could significantly impact his ability to pay his mortgage. There's little nuances like that where sometimes it comes into play, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's critical, sometimes it's not critical, but I think you want to maintain some flexibility, and I do think it's important to empower staff to be able to make some decisions. So.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Anyone else have any general questions or comments? All right, back to you, Will.
With regard to some of the comments, all good comments. With regards to the record, the subcommittee records and the minutes and all that, they are public record. They are not part of this file because this file started when the commission determined as a whole to go to hearing. but those are available. As far as town planner comments, there are no town planner comments relative to this proposal. Town attorney review, that's certainly up to you, whether you want to do that. Certainly no downside I see in having the town attorney review of legislation. Threshold for holding a public hearing is not a bad idea. It's always good to have rationale sometimes in the code as to what are the issues that you would be looking at and making that determination, similar to like, I'll do an analogy to when you grant a waiver of something, there may be circumstances that you put in the code as to why the waiver would be appropriate, and you have to fashion your reasons around that. So if that's of interest of the commission, I don't disagree that that could be a good idea. With regards to things being stayed because of a lawsuit, so at that point, it's really out of our hands anyway. It's in the court system, and I'm not sure, I mean, that's something you should talk with the town attorney, but I'm not sure the zoning regulations is the appropriate place to start establishing when stays occur and when they don't occur. With regards to some of the other comments, with regards to the 45 days, I do kind of have an agreement with Kevin in one regard. There really are two kinds of extensions. One is relative to that 180 days where the plans need to be finalized and some other things need to be done before we kind of move on to the construction phase. And you're right, we did perfect some language in the approval that was a little clearer and was about what you said about it could happen after the expiration period if it gets it in, because that's not really a statutory time frame. That's really your code process in order to keep a project moving in a certain way. So I do think that where that one comes into play, we should probably be more, the clarification should be more in line with what the code, what the approvals are saying in regards to that portion. When it comes to the 5-year aspect, which is a different type of extension, I mean, I don't see the harm in the 45 days. I get the understanding that people could sue because of that. It's not the same thing as when you had a public hearing and you had a process and you know, there's less people going to know about it unless they know about the agenda. And that's not a reason not to do it or to do it. But the point is that I think in law, my understanding is that some things that have time frames, the courts view as mandatory and other ones not as mandatory. And this kind of falls into that realm because the state statute, which gives them the 5 years, it keeps them alive, you can't change that. So you can't say, well, you didn't get it in 45, you've had 45 days left to go, and you got it on the 44th day, you can't say you lost those 44 days. I mean, their approval's still good for those 44 days. So it's not a perfect world. The whole point of the 45 days was so that it would be more timely. But if we are concerned about having a specific day number of creating some kind of lawsuit, the language could be changed to a timely manner. That doesn't mean much.
Prior to the expiration.
Yeah, prior to the expiration. But the difference is, the way we have that latitude for the final plans, going past the expiration date, I really would want to know from an attorney what grounds we would be sitting on when we pass the 5-year expiration date. Because the statutes, that comes from state statutes. You're allowed to extend it an additional 5 years. Once you get to that point where it's past the 5 years, if they haven't given you a request.
Well, what if they've given a request?
Well, that's what I would ask. If they've given the request, is that timely, and does that stay alive in that period, should the meeting occur after the 5 years? My gut is maybe, but I'm not sure about that one. The other one I'm not worried about because that's well before, that's in the first 3 months of the permit. There's 4.5 years to go, so I'm not worried about that one. So that is something I would be concerned about. But it could, you know, again, if we want to clean it up in a way of not even getting into those issues, it could just be prior to the expiration. Now, if they don't meet a meeting, that could be a problem. Again, the main reason for it was so it's timely, that we can be aware of it, we can be more efficient overall with our things. With regard to the amendment for the conditional, we've been saying temporary COs. I mean, another term, or probably a more appropriate term, would be conditional CO. Either way, they're not technically sanctioned under statute, but I will remind you, the current regulation, you can see it, that is the current regulation. Everything that isn't bold double underline is the existing requirements for a certificate of zoning compliance. Nothing in the existing regulations authorize staff to do anything sooner. So, and I'm not advocating that it should be one way or the other. I'm just stressing the point that your current regulation as written does not authorize staff with the flexibility. I'm not against flexibility. I'm not against giving staff more authority. But when you do that, the regulation should be more specific as to what staff can do, just like the rationale for holding a public hearing. Because the problem that staff has is, how far does staff go? And that's sort of been the angst on staff's point of view, is that, you know, we're being asked to do a lot of things, how far can we take that? And that needs, in my opinion, to be spelled out more. Again, I'm open to flexibility. I mean, obviously, anything that can make things more efficient, work better, be more business-friendly to the extent that we aren't, is a good thing. But it isn't just status quo. Either way, status quo isn't working, because more times than not, there are bad apples. It isn't just a couple. There are a fair amount of projects that just linger and linger and linger. Now, the other side of that coin is enforcement. You know, we can do better in the enforcement, but that needs more support from people outside of staff to make that work. Because that's also a hard coin. When you go try to enforce something, you get that criticism. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that really need to be worked on to improve and make things more efficient and work better and be more flexible. But again, this is all up to you. I mean, it's your regulation, it's your process.
Well, what I'm going to suggest, and this is up to the commission, but I would like to continue this so you have an opportunity to speak to Jack about those couple of issues, get some clarification. We'll come back at the next meeting and readdress this. What?
I want to ask one more question.
Go ahead.
Could we put something in this amendment to give the staff some control, and then if they deem necessary to bring it to the commission to make a decision?
That's
Can we do it
something
that way?
that's something that I think when we get into deliberation on this, we'll discuss and see what everybody thinks about it. Yes?
Are we going to get more clarification as to a threshold standard from the town attorney, or will that be taken care of during deliberations or another?
Threshold for
a public hearing?
I mean, if you're interested, I could draft something, and when I talk to Jack, I can show it to him.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? Anything else for tonight on this? All right, just going to continue this till the 7th. Next up, site plan review. We have SDP 2017-03, file number 123, 233, 235 Monroe Turnpike. We have a letter from Solely Engineering in regard to application SDP 2017-03, file number 123, on behalf of EE Equities LLC. The applicant hereby requests that this item be postponed from the Commission's August 24, 2017 meeting agenda and instead reconvene at the September 7, 2017 meeting. So we're meeting. Item number 9, SDP 2017-05, file 124, 246 Main Street, B2 District. Location and operation of mobile food vendor accessory to existing principal brew pub. Well, what do we have for exhibits?
Exhibit 1, site development plan application. Exhibit 2, permission for the mobile food vendors from the owner, property owner. Exhibit 3, site plans from staff of Portland. Exhibit 4, town engineer comments. Exhibit 5, police department comments. Exhibit 6, fire marshal comments. Exhibit 7, town planner comments. Exhibit 8, applicant response to comments. Exhibit 9, resubmission of site development plan application with attachments. Exhibit 10, resubmission of site plan set, updated. Exhibit 11, updated town engineer comments. Exhibit 12, updated town planner comments. And Exhibit 13, building official comments. That is all.
Okay, for the applicant?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your time at this very, very late hour. I am Dave Sippin. My office address is 234 Main Street, and I own the property located at 246 Main Street. And the purpose of this application is to allow our tenant, Voracious Brewing Company, an existing approved brew pub, located at 246 Main Street, to permit mobile food vendors as an accessory to principal brew pub use per Article 6.11.4 and subject to supplemental standards set forth in Articles 6.11.5 and 6.11.6 of the zoning regs. The brew pub, Voracious Brewing Company, they've been at this location for a little over 2 years. They operate a very successful brew pub. I've got the two owners, Mark and Tess Amatolsky, here as well. And they brew several varieties of craft beers. They create new beers and new flavors. And the brew pub serves them for consumption inside or for patrons to take home. And they also provide kegs of beer to restaurants and bars, etc. So we propose that the mobile food vendors, the food trucks, be able to occupy the area in the hashed part of the screen there. It's a small bay of parking of 7 spaces, and it's located, pretty closely in front of the Voracious Brewing Company front door. You can see on this side, the Voracious occupies the southernmost space at that property. The area will be occupied by a maximum of 2 mobile food vendor vehicles with a size of approximately 8 feet by 18 feet. That's a typical size of a larger food truck. Trash receptacles shown on the drawing will be supplied and maintained by the mobile food vendors during the hours of operation. We added some pedestrian safety controls, such as a painted crosswalk, yield and 2 yield pedestrian signs to protect the people walking across there for the cars. And per the regulations, the mobile food vendors will be located in the area only during the permissible hours that the brew pub is open. And presently, the brew pub operating hours are Thursday, 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., Friday, 12 p.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. And the patrons would make their purchases at the food trucks and bring the food inside the brew pub for consumption. There would be no consumption of food or drink outside. There's no dining area outside right now. The 246 Main Street site, which is about a 50,000 square foot building. It has Voracious Brewing, and the next space over is Maltos and Warehouse Wines, and then we have Northeast Laser. That building requires 160 total off-street parking spaces, and there are presently 162 off-street parking spaces existing, two extra. And in your regulations related to this, it states mobile food vendors at a brew pub site shall not occupy parking spaces which are required to fulfill the minimum requirements of principal uses of the subject lot, except where the use of parking spaces is demonstrated at the hours of operation of the other principal uses of the subject lot do not coincide with the times and duration which the mobile food vendor would be present. So we're asking to use up to five more spaces of the required parking when the food trucks are there. But we feel we've got this covered because the primary tenant in the building, Northeast Laser, they operate multiple employee shifts with quite varying employee staff numbers. And their first shift starts at 6 a.m. and ends at 2:30 p.m. And that's the largest primary shift of employees that they have. They have a second shift that starts at 2:30 p.m. and ends at 10:30 p.m. And when that starts, the number of employees falls dramatically. According to Rich Rosselli, the president, at 2:30 they have 25 less employees. And when the office closes at about 4:30, they lose another 15. So they have 40 less employees at 4:30. So we feel this large reduction in employee count for the second shift will more than accommodate when the mobile food vendors are present. And also, since the brew pub primary operating hours are later in the day, afternoons, evenings, and a weekend day, and the largest number of brew pub customers arrive later in the afternoon. So the vast majority of Northeast Laser employees in both shifts, but in particular during the second shift, really only use the rear parking area. You can't see it on this drawing, but there's about 100 spaces in front and 62 in the rear. And they use that because the rear is the main entrance for people that do production work. There's a large locker room, and all of the production rooms and machinery are back there. So they essentially drive around the back, enter the building, and leave from the back. So we feel we've addressed that, and that the parking with these food trucks is adequate. Lastly, the mobile food vendors are required to obtain all necessary permits, licenses, and approvals by the town of Monroe. And they also must obtain a mobile food vendor permit from the zoning enforcement officer. So that wraps it up, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Bruno?
So they're gonna take up those 5 spaces right there, is what you're saying?
Yeah, there's actually 7 in that island, and it made sense to just designate that whole island for that. Conceivably they could have 1 food truck at one time, but that would be a maximum situation, and it's it's surrounded by a landscape island, with extruded concrete curbing, and there's landscape plants and trees there, so it's secluded and protected. But those would be the spaces that are designated.
Concern of mine is lighting. What kind of lighting do you have?
Well, there's a light.
So if somebody is coming from the brew company to the food trucks and back?
Well, if you look on the lower left corner of that island, there's a pole light there with a double-headed light, so it's right there. So it's pretty well lit, and then there's a pole, kind of on either side of the next island. So we feel that area is pretty well lit now.
There's nothing on the building currently?
Nothing on the building. There is lighting as you move up to the where it says overhang. There's soffit lighting there. We could conceivably propose a fixture that's dark sky that you guys would approve if we needed that. But I think right now though, there's pretty adequate lighting at night on that side.
Okay.
Jonathan?
I don't have any questions.
Kathy?
Yeah, I just want a couple of things. So you know that the food trucks are not permitted to have lights or music, other than the lights they need to cook. But
Right.
they can't use any kind of lighting to attract people from the highway, Main Street, to see them. And that there would not be sandwich signs out front saying, food trucks, pull in here.
Correct.
Our regulations don't permit outdoor seating. Are you aware of that?
We would not have any.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said that there would be.
No.
I'm
No,
sorry, I apologize.
No seating or any activity outside.
Okay, that's fine, I just heard you wrong. And you mentioned that there was landscaping.
Well, that island that you can see that surrounds the 3 sides, it's just, it's got plantings all around it.
Do you have any plans to enhance any of the landscaping on the rest of the property?
You know, we have upgraded that, and, fairly recently, so if you look at it, it's pretty attractive now. We had replaced some old and, overgrown and kind of outdated landscaping, so.
Anything closer to the road?
Well, the lawn area on the road is in the state's right-of-way area, so I'm not sure we're allowed to touch that, so we don't really have any out there. But all the islands in the parking lot proper, we've got a fair amount of attractive landscaping.
All right, that's all. Thank you.
I have no questions.
No question.
You mentioned about the, taking the parking spaces away, and the northeast laser has different hours. But if there's a different tenant in the future, then obviously.
Yeah, then we'd have to come before you, and yeah.
I guess that would work.
If any parking issue changed, that we would have to make sure that was addressed
Okay.
before the
And
commission.
This food truck regulation, I know is something new, I believe, and I'm not up to speed on. But I guess one of the questions is it temporary, and what is the limit of it? Is it a temporary thing? I'm not
No.
sure how it
No.
works. So this could be a permanent
They can have food trucks here during their hours of operation,
for the
for
life
as
of
long
the,
as they're there.
and that is
That's our
complies with
regulation.
our regulations.
Yeah, but when they're not operating, those food trucks aren't there,
Gone.
correct?
They're not, they
Pardon
don't
me?
stay there.
When they're not operating a business,
There's no trucks.
there's no
Correct.
trucks.
Oh, they're not parked there permanently?
No,
No, they're only there during their
Yeah.
hours of
Only
operation.
Yeah, they can't
Okay.
stay there.
But they go back and forth as long as
If the brew pub is open,
Brew pub's
they can
open.
have
They're there.
trucks there. If they're not open, there can't be trucks there.
Okay. Okay, that's those are my questions.
Is Northeast Laser open on Saturdays also?
They do have some production. The office is closed, so it's a very small number of people. They would enter through the rear.
Variance or something for 5 spaces?
No, there's no variance. What the code is allowing, what they're asking for is, okay, I think you have one more space than the overall requirement would require if everybody was operating at peak at the same time.
They still have one extra space.
They have one extra space.
With the
So the
trucks.
the trucks are displacing 7 spaces, or they're displacing 6 of those required spaces. But the code provides an ability for you as a commission to allow them to displace some of those spaces because of difference in peak usage. So if Northeast Laser peak is, the afternoon shift or the day shift, and Maltose is, and Voracious's peak is 6:30, 7 o'clock, obviously, there is an overlap of those spaces that are available, so, and the 7 spaces in the scheme of 160-something is kind of minuscule, so.
It's never been filled.
I mean, if Northeast Laser changed to be, well, there's always gonna be somewhat of an overlap, given that Voracious, the portion of Voracious is similar to, the hours are similar to a food establishment that, might have an evening peak, whereas retail stores really peak during the day, they don't peak in the evening, so, and that's the same thing with restaurants. We've looked at restaurants where you've given for instance, Social up the road, which was something else at one time. If you look at that shopping center, the peak usage of those different things, the appliance store, the office, the restaurant, and the clothing store are all different. So they're enjoying really fewer parking spaces because of that, and that's something that the commission encourages.
Thank you.
My only question concerns the crosshatch. Does that line up with the entry door to the establishment?
That drawing doesn't. Is that where?
I went over that with Dave Yorkland.
You asked us to move it.
Yeah, and, well, I asked for it down south, the southerly door, and he pointed out that what he did was he lined it up with the existing ramp.
It's really related to the handicap.
The handicap
Okay,
ramp?
that
Yeah,
was,
lined up
handicap
with-
space.
And actually, it works well, because it dumps
Yeah,
it right
okay.
at the handicap
that was his
space.
reasoning. Yeah, we felt
But-
that was best.
But should we then come like diagonally across, so the crosswalk goes from the food truck area to the ramp?
I think that's overdoing it.
Yeah.
That's my personal.
It was to protect
You
people
wanna cross the
in the main
access,
drive
the
lane in
main
front of the
access way.
building.
The other's a parking aisle.
Well, I'm just looking at where people are actually going to be walking.
I don't know, it goes straight across from the ramp. To me, it seemed like a nice
All right, I mean,
spot.
just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I thought of, yeah, like going diagonally, you're saying?
From the door to the food trucks.
Well, the
Yeah.
thing is that, and technically, the crosswalk for the handicaps, well, that's the only one, there's three other handicaps. I don't know.
All right, but
Usually,
if that's where the curb cut is, it makes sense to
yeah,
have it
and
there.
usually you cross it perpendicular would be the safe thing to do, not.
So people will come out that south door and cross perpendicularly over to the food truck.
I mean, in theory, you could put a second one on the other door.
No, we don't want two.
Yeah.
All right, that was my only question. Is there anyone, well, let's open it up to the public. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this application? Mr. O'Hara, come on down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief.
Yes, we're almost at our deadline.
I've been waiting to see this application for 4 years. I hope this commission approves this application. I hope you approve it without reservation, and I hope you approve it in the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Anyone else who'd like to speak in favor of this application?
Hi, I'm Mark Simatolsky. I live in Trumbull. My wife and I own Maltos Express and Gracious Brewing. The food trucks would help our business along because we make beer, we don't want to make food. And it helps us to get people to come to our brewery, and it's also a good draw for Monroe. We probably draw 300-400 people, during the week to our business, and it's good that they can get food at a food truck, and it makes it simple for us to have a similar business model to other breweries in Connecticut. Most breweries that I've talked to have food trucks come in, and it just is a nice, easy way to have someone have good food and good beer at the same time. So we appreciate you looking at this and making up the food truck zoning regulation for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of this application? Anyone who would like to speak in opposition? Any general questions or comments? Mr. Sippens, back to you.
I am finished, and I thank you all for your time.
Thank you. I guess we really didn't have to open this to the floor because it was a site plan.
You don't have to,
Right.
you don't want to.
No. I wanted Mr. O'Hara to have an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, moving on, extensions. First up, and I know it's 11 o'clock, but we've got about 10 more minutes and we'll wrap everything up. Extensions, where's my extensions? Okay, 13-1 SEP, following 1518A, 579 Main Street. And I'm also gonna put this in with 13-2 ZCA, file number 993D, 579 Main Street. Request for a 90-day extension. We have a letter from Q&R Associates regarding Real-Time Investments LLC, McDonald's Corporation, 579 Main Street, Monroe. This shall serve as a request on behalf of Real-Time Investments and McDonald's Corporation for an additional extension of 90 days to record the special permit and zone boundary change approval approved by the Monroe Planning and Zoning Commission, originally dated August 29, 2013, which had previously been extended to December 30th, 2016, and further extended to April 1st, 2017, and then to June 30th, 2017, and lastly, September 28, 2017, for property located at 579 Main Street. If approved, the new deadline to record the approvals would be December 27, 2017. Do we have a motion?
Motion to grant the 90-day extension to both properties at 579 Main Street, 13-1-SCP, file number 1518A, and 13-2 ZCA, file number 993D.
We have a motion. We have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, starting with Leon.
Ambrosi, yes.
Council, yes.
Porter, yes.
Lisa, yes. Riley, yes.
Okay. Next up, SEP 2017-01, file number 1584A, 7187 431 Web Circle, and ZCA 2014-01, file number 1010D, 7187 431 Web Circle. Both are requesting a 60-day extension. We have two letters from Spath Bjorklund Associates. Please be advised that on behalf of our client, we are requesting a 60-day extension to address the above reference approval that expires January 16th, 2018. That is on the special exception permit and on the zone change. Please be advised that on behalf of our client, we are requesting a 60-day extension to address the above reference approval that expires September 6th, 2017.
I just know in the agenda, it's listed as 2014 for the zone change. In the letter, 2017, the letter is correct. It's ZCA 2017.
Okay.
Motion to grant a 60-day extension to 7187 431 Web Circle. File number is SCP-2017-01, file number 1584A, and ZCA-2017-01, file number 1010D.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? Call the roll, starting with Leon.
Monroe, yes.
Councilman.
Porter, yes.
Lisa, yes.
Riley, yes.
Okay, item number 11, bond releases or reductions, we have none. Item 12, modifications, we have none. Item 13, meeting minutes, August 3rd.
We don't have them.
We don't have
We didn't
those.
get
No,
them.
you don't.
Yeah.
You need to table.
What's
I,
that?
we haven't circulated that.
I was
We'll
looking.
table. I was looking.
All right, so that's tabled to our next meeting. Item number 14, application deliberations and determinations. We only have one, and that is for the site plan.
Yeah.
Will, I know you usually like to have a letter, but do we need that for a site plan?
I do recommend that, but if you want to do this one is pretty straightforward because the plan is self-explanatory. Did you have anything left? Because they addressed all my comments. The plan speaks for itself and has the standards that would be incorporated in any approval. So you could grant the approval subject to the written notes that are on that plan, which are, would be the conditions.
What is the opinion of the commission?
I
Want
say
to
approve.
approve? Do you want to deliberate and vote on this tonight?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve site plan review, STP-2017-05, file number 124, 246 Main Street, B2 District.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All right, Will said that you wanted the notes on the,
There are notes on the plan which would be your conditions of approval, that they follow those notes, and that also the standard timing of providing final plan sets and filing and recording of approval as per your standard conditions. That's all I think.
okay. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Ambrosi, yes.
Councilman.
Porter, yes.
Lisa, yes. Riley, yes.
Finally. And that brings us to regulation review amendment work session. After Labor Day, we'll do something.
I would like to hand out, which I wish we could have talked about tonight, and that's up to you if you want to talk about it. This is something that staff is recommending. It's pretty simple. It's an issue that's been coming up again and again with mainly residential, single-family homes. And I don't know if you want to talk about it now. It won't take long. If not, we'll push off to another meeting, but we would like to get this moving as soon as possible.
Give us the,
Okay, it's pretty simple. If you recall, some time back, we had issues with things like propane tanks and septics in the setback, and we made the code so that those things could occur in the setbacks. We're finding now with specifically residential development that similar structures related to stormwater are coming up as an issue, because if you think of a sloped lot and you're building a house, you got your septic, you gotta have separation of septic and stormwater controls. If you're trying to pick up the driveway, the house and all that, well, there's a portion of the setback that goes to the road, and we're not being able to capture that in a structure because we can't put it in the yard. Sometimes it also dictates it to be off to the side or to the rear, and depending on the size, scale of the lot, that becomes a problem. So the solution, in our opinion, is to give that an exception as well to some extent, and actually give these exceptions to limit them, because now we're getting more creep into losing the buffer, that we limit it to 25%, which is a pretty big number if you think about the setback. And then the last part, number 4, is that with the water control structures, you might have a structure, you have structures in that setback, but we don't really want to see them in, there's a 10-foot setback, but we want them to screen it. Like if you have an overspill with riprap, it's not the most attractive thing to see from the street, so they can put a little screening in front of it and call it a day.
Okay.
So
Most of the time, this is underground, right?
most of it's underground, right? But there may be a control structure, an outlet structure that comes out, and,
So you want commission's approval to put this forward to a public
Here.
hearing?
Correct. Agree? Yeah.
Any questions? Any concerns? Everyone in agreement?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
No correspondence. I have nothing new to report. Any other commissioners have anything to report?
I don't have any report, but I was wondering if we could request, after spending so much time tonight talking about vernal pools and critical terrestrial habitat, that maybe we could have an expert of our own come in and address that issue. We've invited their expert to come, but maybe because there is a difference of opinion, and maybe this would be an opportunity for us to hear another point of view. We have a budget that allows us to do that?
Yeah.
Do we want to do that?
Do we have a budget that allows us to do that?
I do not have a budget probably anymore that could do that. Technically, you can also charge that to the applicant.
First of all, does staff feel it's necessary to bring in an outside third-party consultant for this? And if you do think it's necessary, do we have anyone that is available that we could approach?
That's a question that the commission needs to determine if you feel you need another, an expert to, if you have questions that, upon hearing their expert testimony, if you have questions about that can only be answered by another expert, that would be reason for you to want that. Inland Wetlands has done that in the past, I think 2, maybe 3 times. And
In light of the fact that,
at least for us, what it involved was a lot of time to set that up, because we have to go to a consultant and get a consultant, get a price, the whole thing.
well, and in light of the fact that none of us have had an opportunity to read what the applicant is submitting as expert testimony, I'd like to have an opportunity to review that, maybe hear what Mr. Kenny has to say at our next meeting, and then make that determination.
That's right.
I'm good with
Yeah,
that.
it's really something you should discuss during the hearing portion when they're here.
Right, and then we can request
Doesn't
that at
that
the
fall
hearing,
mostly to the wetlands
That's fine.
commission?
right?
I just wanted
I-
to
you
raise
know,
the issue because
we're
we're
gonna be
allowed to have.
That's the other thing, excuse me. Paul just brought up a good point. This is really something that's the purview of the Inland Wetlands Commission, and we're really gonna be relying on their report to us, because that's what, that's their thing.
That's okay.
We also have the ability and the authority to require things, but I think that's what that commission is set up for. Let's see what they have to say.
That's fine. I just raised it because I know
Stole my
that,
thunder, Paulie.
What's that?
Well, you were looking the other way, I was raising my hand like a good little guy, and I was gonna say the same thing, but you were looking at Paul, so Paul went.
Sorry, I'll look at you next time. Well, I look at you
All the
first, you
time.
complain. Anything else from staff?
No.
Motion to adjourn?
Please.